Chapter 23-23. Thinking of this, the leader seemed a bit depressed. Who did he offend? How did he end up kicking this iron plate? Previously, when they were hiding in the forest, it was clear that they were just a bunch of pretty boys who didn't have the strength to truss a chicken. Moreover, their team of 8 to 9 people also brought along a carriage. Through his unerring precise judgment, he deduced that Crown Prince Mo's team was clearly a fat sheep waiting to be slaughtered. Who would have thought that as soon as he made his move, he would realize that things were not as he imagined. Moreover, they were heading towards a very bad situation. Where did you guys escape from? Arbor tilted his head and asked with a hint of curiosity in his eyes. Aren't these refugees too bold? With such strength, they still dared to take over the mountain and become a bandit. The nearby cauliflower town. A woman's frozen body stiffened as tears and snot flowed down her face. She looked regretful and sad. Miss, please let us go. We will definitely leave this place in the future and repent for our mistakes. We will never have the thought of robbing again. You can't let us go. An unfamiliar roar sounded. A team of 20 or so people quickly ran out from the back of the mountain path. The leader was a middle-aged man who was very tall and had a very thick beard. At first glance, he looked like a savage who had come out of a primitive forest. Young master, miss, are you guys all right? The bearded man cupped his fist towards Emo Lien and looked her up and down. Seeing that they were fine, he nodded and said, Young master probably doesn't know. This group of refugee bandits has been roaming around the outskirts of the Ba Huang mountain range. They have killed and injured more than 10 merchants. I am the leader of the Wind Concealment Mercenary Group, Wang Lu. I have taken on a mission to clear out the refugees in the southern city. I hope that the young masters and misses can make things easy for me. The bearded middle-aged man cupped his fist again and said with a sincere face, These people are indeed extremely evil. They have killed more than one person. No, that's not it. What he said is not true at all. Miss, we're just a bunch of refugees who were forced to flee here. We haven't done anything outrageous. The woman with tears and snot flowing down her face screamed, but she couldn't move at all. When she screamed, the muscles on her face trembled slightly, and her expression was somewhat distorted. This mission can be checked in the Mercenary Guild. This is the truth. I'm not making things up. The bearded man said righteously, If you don't believe me, you can follow us to the mercenary shop when you pass by the southern city. This mission was issued by a merchant in the victim's southern city. Other than our Wind Concealment Mercenary Squad, there are several other mercenary squads of various sizes vying to take on this job. Wang Lu didn't hide anything and told Emo Lien and Xiao Mu in full detail. The vice leader of the mercenary group scratched his head speechlessly. Big Brother was still as honest as ever. He had already said that it was for the sake of the mission, so it was only natural for the other party to ask for some benefits from his mercenary group. After all, this group of refugees was not defeated by their mercenary group. Of course, their mercenary group naturally had the ability to defeat this group of refugees. It was just that they did not meet them first. Arbor blinked and flicked out a silver needle from his finger, silencing the woman's wailing and howling. Noisy. The leader of the Wind Concealment Mercenary Group, Wang Lu, was stunned and looked at the group of refugees. Chapter 23-24. The little girl's movements were very fast. He saw her snap her fingers and the woman's screams disappeared. However, when he arrived, he discovered that the group of refugees were all fixed in place. Their bodies were strangely stiff, and they couldn't move at all. Wang Lu, the leader of the Wind Concealment Mercenary Group, felt a slight respect for Arbor's group. They were very young, but they were very decisive in their actions. It seemed that they were not a simple group of people. This time, they could only negotiate properly. Wang Lu was a cautious person. Before doing anything, he would always think about his own mercenary group. If it was possible, he didn't want to attract a strong enemy for his brothers because of a wrong decision he had made when he was outside. They were all people who lived on the edge of a knife. Wang Lu cared about his brothers' lives more than anyone else. Gentlemen, ladies. Because we can't accept this mission anymore, so. Wang Lu's implication was that these refugees would not be of much use in Xiao Mu and the others' hands. How about this? Our wind concealment mercenary group will turn in the mission and we'll split the profits 50-50? Wang Lu asked carefully. He was still a little scared. After all, their mercenary group did nothing but accept a mission. They still wanted to split the profits that, however, the mercenary group's current situation forced him to put down his old face. His brothers really needed this batch of profits. At least they could get some money to treat Bao's illness. Arbor nodded his little head. You guys can take them. There's no need to split the profits 50-50. She was so pitiful. She was not someone who needed those things. How much could a team of 20 people get from the mission? If they had to split the profits with them, it wouldn't even be enough to fill the gaps between their teeth. Wang Lu was stunned when he heard that. He then said emotionally, "How can we accept that? If you're embarrassed, then leave the refugees here. Our battle-crazed mercenary group will take them in. No need to be polite." Aha! Suddenly, a rough laugh interrupted everyone's conversation. Battle-crazed. The leader of the wind concealment mercenary group, Wang Lu, gritted his teeth and turned his head. His eyes dimmed as he looked at the beautiful woman who was lying in the arms of a man with a scar on his face. Mad Warrior noticed Wang Lu's gaze and deliberately grabbed the woman's waist. His bare arm tightly wrapped around the woman's body as he laughed wildly. "Ying, why didn't you say hello to Commander Wang? He's too insensible." The woman called Ying laughed coquettishly. She hung on the man's arm as if her bones were broken. She gave Wang Lu a look of disdain and said in a disdainful tone, "Greetings, Commander Wang." "Ha!" Berserker laughed heartily and raised his hand. 40 to 50 of his men rushed forward and tied up the refugees. "Take him away!" Berserker shouted. Wang Lu's subordinates cursed with bloodshot eyes. "Mad Warrior, you despicable man, are you trying to steal our business again? What? You don't like it?" Berserker laughed loudly. The scar on his face was ugly and twisted like a centipede. "Even if you don't like it, you better hold it in." Berserker raised his eyebrows and snorted. "Brothers, take him away." Chapter 23-25. A ball of light blue pure fire danced slightly in the little girl's hand, looking very transparent and gorgeous. However, it contained traces of power that caused one's heart to tremble. "You think too highly of yourself," Miss Chiao scolded sternly. "Did I say you could leave? Damn it. What kind of flame was that?" Berserker touched his shoulder. The outer layer of his clothes was scorched, but other than that, his body did not suffer any damage. This caused him to be suddenly shocked, but his mood slowly relaxed. Only then did he have time to size up Arbor. With one look, he could not help but be shocked. Although the little girl looked young, in another 1 or 2 years, she would be amazing. She would definitely bloom like a flower in full bloom. Compared to that clean, white, and delicate little face, and then looking at the idiot in his arms with heavy makeup, a strong feeling of disdain emerged from Berserker's heart. Berserker pushed away the spineless woman in his arms and walked a few steps forward with a laugh. He sized up Arbor and said, "I, Berserker, was rude just now. I didn't have time to discuss it with the little girl." His centipede scar was distorted from his smile. "How about this? Our Berserker mercenary group's base is not far from here in the southern city. Why don't you come back to the base with us and discuss it properly? Let's see if it's 50-50 or 60-40. What do you think?" The little girl looked like she was playing with the flame in her hand. It only looked scary on the outside, but when it hit him, it was like scratching an itch. When he got this little girl into his base, heat up Berserker was thinking about the girl wretchedly in his heart when he saw a red-hot flame pounce at his feet. Before he could react, the flame soared and burned around him. Now, the taste of it was truly satisfying. Berserker howled and took a few steps back, but his body was still imprisoned by the circle of flame. He opened up a defensive shield, but he still felt like he was almost a piece of fat pork in the fire, being roasted by the hot flames with sizzling sounds. Arbor lowered her little head and casually played with the little blue ball of fire in her hand. Just now, Prince Mo's furious attack made her feel a little puzzled. At the same time, she looked up at her husband. "Disgusting guy, let him die here." Mo Lien's eyes flashed with killing intent. As a man, he naturally understood the wretched light in the scar-faced man's eyes. He actually dared to think about his wife in front of him. His death was not enough to be regretted. Arbor tugged at her sleeve and gently tossed the blue fireball in his hand. The crown prince couldn't help but laugh. With a flick of his sleeve, he retrieved the red flame. He lowered his head to look at her and said softly, "Jojo, you used too little spiritual energy just now." Arbor was expressionless. "Too many. I'll kill them in one hit." Zhou Huan and the others were speechless. Should he sympathize with that idiot from the battle-crazed mercenary group? He actually dared to look down on their young Mississippi. This old fellow was most likely going to be in big trouble. For the first time, Arbor actually held a fireball in his hand. He had a lot of fun playing with fire. A ball of blue flame, accompanied by a gust of wind, bounced onto Berserker's clothes with a whoosh. Hee. Berserker's face was burned black by Emollien's fire. At this time, when he saw the blue flame coming, he hurriedly raised his defensive shield to block it. "You can only take it if I give it to you." Arbor coldly glanced at Berserker. 5, 6, 7, 8 small fireballs continuously appeared between his fingers and whooshed towards Berserker's body. Chapter 23-26. If I don't give it to you, don't even think about getting half a share. Arbor expressionlessly withdrew the little blue fireball in his hand. Do you understand? The Berserk Battle Mercenary Group's leader finally understood what kind of little fiend he had provoked. This time, he completely understood the power of the little blue fireball. The blue flame directly burned a hole in his defensive barrier. The blue flame covered his skin, and just like the scarlet flame from before, it roasted him until he jumped back and forth and screamed. When the others saw this, they all revealed terrified expressions. How was this possible? Their Berserk battle captain was an 8th-level spirit master who controlled a 5th level of spiritual fire. What the hell was the blue flame in that girl's hand? Why was it able to burn a level 8 spirit master with 5 layers of spiritual fire? Berserk Battle's face was filled with fear. His neck and body were covered in bruises. Looking at Arbor with fear in his eyes, Berserk Battle could not hide the deep fear in his heart. "You? Who the hell are you people?" Berserker cried out in fear, trying to put on a brave front. Arbor coldly glanced at him. "Who am I? You don't need to know." After saying that, his gaze indifferently shifted to Zhou Huan and the others. The latter immediately understood and went forward to tie up the Berserk Battle Mercenary Group's leader. At this time, the other members of the Berserk Battle Mercenary Group finally reacted and pointed at Zhou Huan and the others, cursing angrily, "What are you doing? Let go of him. Let go of our leader. Quick. Our Berserk Battle Mercenary Group is a 3rd-level mercenary group. You guys can't afford to offend us." Bah! Zhou Huan unceremoniously spat at them and directly stepped forward, pressing the Berserk Battle Mercenary Group's leader to the ground. The other mercenaries of Berserker were furious. Just as they were about to swarm up, Zhou Huan and the other 8 Talisman Masters made a move at the same time. They nimbly took out a handful of body-securing talismans from their inner worlds and threw them at those people without hesitation. Miss said that when fighting, there was no need to feel sorry for the talismans. The talismans could be drawn again, but if the person was gone, there would be nothing left. They felt that what the eldest young Miss said was extremely correct. Thus, at this moment, when they were fighting against the battle-crazed mercenary group, they no longer felt heartache about the consumption of talismans. You can do whatever you want. After all, Miss has plenty of blank talismans. If he ran out, he could just work through the night and continue painting. The group of crazed battle mercenary band members simply hadn't expected that Zhou Huan's group of 8 were actually all talisman masters. Although the talismans they threw out were all mid-level talismans, and many of them might not be able to freeze people in place at once, but they couldn't withstand so many talismans flying over together. Not everyone in the battle-crazed mercenary group was a spirit realm cultivator. Some mystic cultivators with slightly lower levels were pitifully immobilized under the effects of the immobilization talisman. As a result, at least half of the 20 or so members of the battle-crazed mercenary group were locked down by Zhou Huan's group. The rest of the pitiful sects were swarmed by Zhou Huan, Chi Hua, and the others. They were pressed to the ground and beaten up. After this fat beating, the Berserker mercenary group cried out and begged for mercy. Among them, there were 3 stubborn vice-regiment commanders who were the focus of Zhou Huan and the others. The group of talisman masters' cultivation might not be as good as theirs, but they had talismans in their hands. Seeing one of the vice-regiment commanders stiffen his neck and vainly attempt to lead the group members to break out of the encirclement, Chi Hua promptly made a decision to open an attack talisman. Chapter 23-27. There was a flash of light. The attack talisman in Chi Hua's hand slapped the man's head. When the 2 talisman brothers saw this, they quickly threw out a few stun talismans, causing the vice leader to fall to the ground in a daze, completely unable to resist. A few talisman masters swarmed forward again and beat the guy to death. After a while, all the members of the Berserker mercenary group had their hands tied behind their backs and were tied to the tree one by one. The woman called Ying Ying had long been scared out of her wits. How would she dare to go forward? She curled up at the side and hugged her knees as she squatted on the ground. Seeing Arbor's cold gaze sweeping towards her, she hurriedly cried out in fear, "Miss, please spare me. Miss, please spare me. I'm a commoner who was forcefully taken back by this Berserker mercenary group's leader. I'm innocent, miss." "Bitch, what did you say?" The scar-faced man, who was tied to the tree, grimaced in pain as he shouted angrily, "You bitch, if you didn't despise the poor and love the rich, abandon Wang Lu, sneak into my tent, and take off your clothes to seduce me, would I have taken in a trash like you? A shameless old woman, do you think you're a fairy? Why would I want to steal a bitch like you? If I didn't take you in, you would have been sold to a brothel long ago. Shut up." Zhou Huan flew up and gave him a big slap in the face, blocking the guy's mouth full of obscenities. "You're not allowed to talk nonsense in front of Miss. This dog, didn't he see that the crown prince's eyes were sharp? No wonder he could only be a small mercenary group leader for his entire life. He couldn't do anything big and didn't even have the ability to discern. Arbor couldn't be bothered to care about this woman. Seeing her and the Berserker mercenary group's leader arguing, he only felt that it was a dog-eat-dog fight. The little guy was expressionless as he glanced at Wang Lu of the Wind Concealment mercenary group. He pointed to the Berserker mercenary group who had been beaten up and asked, "Who are they? What's a 3rd-rank mercenary group?" Wang Lu of the Wind Concealment mercenary group had long known that this girl was extraordinary. Now that he saw how she dealt with things, he felt even more admiration for her. This group of people looked very young, but once they did, they would amaze the world with a single brilliant feat without any effort. He subdued everyone in the battle-crazed mercenary group. This made Wang Lu of the Wind Concealment mercenary group even more respectful towards Arbor and the others. "Miss, you may not know this, but in the mercenary world, mercenary groups are ranked according to the size and strength of the mercenary groups, from low to high, and are divided into level 1 to level 7 mercenary groups. The battle-crazed mercenary group can be considered a rather large mercenary group in the southern city. They have over 100 people. Although they can't be compared to those 4th and 5th rank mercenary groups with over 1,000 people, at least in a small city like the southern city, the battle-crazed mercenary group can be considered an existence that can speak for itself. That's right. We still have some brothers left in the city. I advise you to let us go quickly. Otherwise, when I gather all my brothers and come back, I'll peel off your skin. Roar roar. The heroic spirit that Berserker had just accumulated was slapped by more than 10 consecutive slaps. His cheeks flushed red, and his teeth shattered into pieces and fell to the ground. Berserker stared in horror at the broken teeth that had fallen out of his mouth, his face ashen. Are you tired of living for such filthy words? Mo Lien glanced at him coldly. Chapter 23-28. Quang Zhan shuddered and didn't dare to provoke the man in front of him anymore. He felt that if he said another word, not only would his teeth shatter, but his entire head would also shatter. What about you guys? Arbor wasn't affected by Quang Zhan's words and turned to ask the leader of the Wind Concealment mercenary group. The leader of the Wind Concealment mercenary group, Wang Lu, laughed bitterly. We only have 23 brothers in our group and one of them is still seriously injured. Now, we can only be considered a small second-class mercenary group. Arbor sized up Wang Lu and nodded his little head. He still said expressionlessly, I see that you have a good face. You should have great prospects in the future. Work hard with your brothers and you will be successful one day. Everyone was speechless. Mo Lian's mouth twitched. When did this little guy of hers become a fortune teller? All right, you guys pack up and take these refugees away. The leader of the Wind Concealment Mercenary Corps cupped his hands at Xiao Mu in gratitude. Miss, I can't thank you enough for your great kindness. In the future, if you need me, Wang Lu, for anything, you can come to the southern city to find me. Damn you, you heartless bastard. You actually handed us over to the mercenary group. Are you trying to force us, the weak and powerless refugees, to die? You cursed. That shrew started cursing again. But before she could finish cursing, her mouth was stuffed with a ball of mud. She could only stare at Arbor with a pair of eyes that were bulging like dead fish. If they were handed over to the mercenary group and brought back to South City, they would face the fate of being imprisoned and awaiting execution. Arbor cast a cold glance at the shrew. If today, we were just a group of ordinary people, we would be the ones to suffer. So, wasn't this the rule that you guys set? The weak were prey to the strong, and the strong were respected. People had to pay the price for what they did. What was there to be indignant about? The Wind Concealment Mercenary Group left with the group of refugees, leaving behind a group of bitter battle-crazed mercenary group members. When Scarface saw that Hidden Wind's people had all left, he inexplicably became nervous. Just by looking at the way that girl dealt with the refugees, she didn't seem like a soft-hearted person. Would she kill them all? Kill them all? What are you doing? Berserker's lips trembled as he looked at the girl who was approaching him step by step. He always felt that there was a storm under her eyes. He wouldn't kill them all, would he? Mad Warrior's heart trembled. Hand it over. Mad Warrior was dumbfounded. What? Arbor raised a small fist and punched him on the left side of his face. Are you going to hand it over or not? The corners of Emolien's mouth twitched as she silently raised her hand to cover her face. Great Aunt, hand it over? What do you want us to hand it over? Stop pretending. Arbor felt that the man in front of him was pretending. How could he not know the consequences of losing a robbery? This guy had been pretending from the beginning, and now he still wanted to continue pretending? He was simply asking for a beating. Arbor raised her small fist again and punched Mad Warrior's right face. Hand it over. Mad Warrior really wanted to cry. He really didn't know what this little girl wanted him to hand over. On the other hand, the deputy leader who was beaten up and had a bloody nose and a swollen face seemed to have a flash of inspiration as he hurriedly stuttered, Leader, quick, hand over the resources in your inner world. Chapter 23-29. What? Berserker's face contorted, and his entire jaw almost fell off. You. This guy actually wanted to rob the Berserker mercenary group so matter-of-factly? On what basis? Bam. Arbor received another punch to the jaw and said coldly, You don't want your eyes anymore? Berserker wished he could cry. Cough. Mo Lien walked forward with her hands behind her back and stood in front of Berserker. She spoke for Arbor. Hurry up, don't dawdle. Arbor nodded. That's right. What husband said was exactly what she was too lazy to say. These people were too dawdling. They should have handed over the goods long ago, and then everyone could have counted and distributed them. Berserker silently wept. With a flick of his finger, he suddenly took out a small basket of things from his inner world. Arbor looked back, and her gaze instantly hardened. She ruthlessly kicked the man's lower abdomen, scaring him into screaming. Mo Lien held back her laughter and put on a stern face. Are you trying to dismiss a beggar? These words actually sounded a bit familiar. Arbor froze and then turned to look at Berserker, who still had lingering fear. Hand it over, everyone hand it over. Berserker hurriedly took out a lot of things from his inner world. Most of them were pills, spirit stones, and the like. The Berserker mercenary group's members all had bitter expressions as they dug things out of their inner worlds. Among them, Three mystic cultivators didn't have inner worlds, so they could only use their eyes to signal Zhou Huan and the others to untie them. After rummaging around their bodies for a long time, they finally found some good stuff and handed it over. Arbor looked at the goods piled up into a small mountain on the ground and pursed her lips noncommittally. For such a pile of scrap metal, there was nothing good that could be brought out. Zhou Huan, go divide this pile of junk and bring it all. Arbor waved her small hand. She didn't care about these lousy things at all. Zhou Huan and the others, on the other hand, were overjoyed. They hurriedly sat down and divided the spoils. One by one, everyone was beaming with joy. At this moment, Berserker's tears had already flowed to his stomach. He really didn't check the almanac before leaving the house today. He actually provoked such an ominous star. She hoped that she would never meet this couple again in this life or in her next life. When Arbor saw the Berserker mercenary group's drooping head with a pained expression on his face, he couldn't help but feel a little better. That was good. She was happy to see him unhappy. Well, since the matter here has been settled, let's continue our journey. Mo Lien was secretly amused, but her face did not reveal any clues. Old Man Chen breathed a sigh of relief. He sat on the front of the car and said, "If we hurry up, we can reach the next accommodation before darks." "There's no hurry," Mo Lien said calmly. "Jojo, do you want to pick some herbs to bring back?" "There's no need for that." Arbor glanced at the barren herbs nearby. She looked over and saw a low-grade herb growing not far away. It didn't look like a place that would produce any good herbs. The two people rode on the same horse. Mo Lien raised his hand to ruffle the strands of the little fellow's disheveled black hair at her temples. "Then let's have Uncle Chen hurry to the lodging point." Arbor nodded and snuggled in Mo Lien's arms. She said calmly, "Don't be afraid. It's fine even if we have to eat and sleep in the open." Actually, she really wasn't that precious. However, Mo Lien had always pampered her, which made her feel a little helpless. "Sleep, sleep, I'll catch up on it tomorrow morning." Chapter 23:30. Wait. The Battle Berserker mercenary band looked at the people from Arbor who had turned around and left. They couldn't help but howl in their hearts. "Brothers, let them go first. Where did these people come from? Does anyone know that they have such a bloody personality?" Battle Berserker shook his body. A small rope naturally wouldn't be able to bind a group of spirit masters like them. Unfortunately, the other party had attached spirit power to the rope that the Battle Berserker mercenary band wanted to cry. 2 hours later, the Battle Berserker mercenary band's reinforcements arrived. When they saw the people who came, the Battle Berserker mercenary band's members really cried out. Young Master Chen, Miss Ro Yi, help." The people who came were the round-faced girl and her group that had saved Xiao He in the border town. The man called Young Master Chen had a cold face. He raised his hand and had his subordinates come forward to rescue the Battle Berserker mercenary band. What happened? Because they needed to find a lot of materials on this trip, they had already booked a mercenary band and said that they would meet on the outskirts of the 8 desolate mountain range. They just didn't expect Battle Berserker to be tied up here. Speaking of which, Battle Berserker mercenary band was one of the top mercenary bands in South City. They didn't know what had happened to make them so miserable. Battle Berserker wiped away the blood on his face and gritted his teeth. "We were set up by a group of shameless people." The round-faced girl called Miss Ro Yi crossed her arms in front of her chest and glanced at Battle Berserker. "Did you take on another mission? You don't look like you're being honest." Battle Berserker's face twitched slightly. He did take on a refugee mission. Since he was going to accompany young Master Chen to search for materials in the 8 desolate mountain range, he might be able to meet the refugees and turn in the mission. But he didn't expect that Battle Berserker's wishful thinking would turn out to be unsatisfactory. Young Master Chen glanced at them coldly and said faintly, "Do you want to rest? How could they help find materials in this state?" Young Master Chen and Miss Ro Yi both frowned and sized up the Battle Berserker mercenary band. "I'm fine. Young Master Chen and Miss Ro Yi's time is precious. Let us be on our way." Wild Warrior hurriedly smiled fawningly. What a joke! They had just lost a large amount of resources. If they didn't perform well now and annoyed young Master Chen, wouldn't they be even more unlucky if he didn't give them a single cent? Since Berserker and the others said that it was fine, young Master Chen nodded and led the group towards the outer mountain range. The 8 desolate mountain range was extremely large. It was divided into 3 major regions: the outer region, the central region, and the inner region. To be honest, no one had been able to enter the central region for so many years. Occasionally, 1 or 2 teams would enter, but they would use their strength to prove that they wouldn't be able to come out. Therefore, as time passed, even fewer people would go to the central region of the 8 desolate mountain range to throw away their lives. The things that young Master Chen wanted were all located in the outskirts. It was just that the outskirts of the 8 desolate mountain range had been excessively deforested in recent years. However, he knew that there was a relatively hidden mountain here. If he searched carefully, he could still find a lot of ores, crystals. They just reached the mountain peak that young Master Chen had mentioned when they saw a carriage parked there from afar. Chapter 23:31. Beside them sat 10 young men and women, plus an old man. They were sitting around a bonfire, cooking food. They didn't look like a team that came to the Ba Huang mountain range to train. Instead, they looked like they came here to have a picnic. Big brother? Miss Ro Yi looked strangely at her brother, who was standing in front of her and couldn't even move his feet. She couldn't help but frown. Why did Big Brother look so strange? Her line of sight followed her brother's gaze and landed on a little girl with a wooden expression. The little girl was wrapped in a furry floral cloak. She held a branch in one hand and was slowly poking at the fire. Her appearance was indeed very exquisite and beautiful, but her brother's personality was cold and unsociable. He was never someone who would be charmed by beauty. Why was he so abnormal today? Ro Yi raised her eyes and glanced at the little girl again. Occasionally, sparks would float out from the fire. As soon as they flickered, a slender hand would immediately grab her little claws and rub them in the palm of his hand. Whether it was appearance or bearing, that young master didn't lose to her brother. She hadn't seen such an outstanding man in the divine continent for a long time. Zhou Huan and a group of people surrounded the bonfire and ate a rather fat roe deer as if there was no one else around them. They chattered happily. Delicious, delicious. Roasted deer meat, fat and tender. I didn't expect to find a deer on the divine continent. Unlike when they were in Shuntian Prefecture, there weren't many things that could be eaten in the mountains and forests. Many animals and plants had mutated. Just looking at them was disgusting. Would you dare to eat them? They just haven't eaten them yet, Arbor said lightly. This didn't mean that Tian Yun and the others would let go of this fertile continent. Zhou Huan and the others were stunned, but they didn't ask anything. Although the little girl was expressionless, she had already thrown several small animals into the pasture garden on Paradise Planet when everyone was catching the deer. Jojo, drink the soup. Mo Lien smiled and scooped a small bowl of meat soup into her hand. Prince Mo's heart was filled with happiness as he watched her lower her head like a small animal and sip the soup in small mouthfuls. He just liked to feed this little fellow. It would be good to raise it until it was white and plump. She was so soft that he wanted to take a bite out of her. Young Master Chen, Miss Ro Yi, how about we leave first? The one who spoke was Berserker, the leader of the Berserker mercenary group. When he saw the carriage, his eyelids started twitching. When they got closer and realized that it was Arbor's group, they had a bad feeling. Didn't they agree that it would be best if they never met again in this lifetime? How come it hadn't even been 4 hours, and they were already up against this group of fiends? Berserker didn't notice at all that his voice was trembling a little. He looked like a frightened quail that couldn't wait to escape from the jaws of a tiger. Miss Softclothes saw Mad Warrior's cowardly look, and she inadvertently glanced at him. She crossed her arms and said, "What's wrong, Mad Warrior? We didn't spend money to get you to come here so that the Berserker mercenary group could idle around and do nothing. Hurry up and bring your brothers to the nearby mountains to help look." Mad Warrior wanted to cry but had no tears. He glanced at young Master Chen, who was pursing his lips and not speaking. Chapter 23:32. Seeing that the other party didn't react, she hastily stammered, Young Master Chen, we can actually search in other mountains. This place. Just go if I tell you to. What are you blabbering on about? Miss Ro-yi glared at him with dissatisfaction. It's such a big mountain, how could everything have been dug up by someone else? Big Brother had said that this place was rich in resources. It was just that when Big Brother had come here for his training, his inner world wasn't enough to hold so many things by himself. Therefore, he'd picked a time to bring everyone here. The 8 desolate mountain range was very large, and not all of the outer areas had been explored. Some hidden places were still unexplored. With a bitter expression, Berserker Jean walked behind Xiao Mu and the others with his cowardly brothers to search for ores everywhere. Arbor's group didn't pay them any attention from beginning to end. They sat around the fire and shared the fresh and delicious deer meat. The broth emitted waves of fragrance in the air, causing Miss Ro-yi to involuntarily gulp. Miss Ro-yi was at the back of the group, secretly watching Prince Emo in a daze and looking at Miss Chiao with envy. When she heard this, Miss Ro-yi hurriedly took a few steps forward and bowed respectfully to Miss Ro-yi. Miss, do you have any orders? Ro-yi's cold face relaxed slightly when she saw her respectful gaze. I'll go walk around the forest in a bit and bring back some game for you to roast. Xiao He immediately felt a bit uneasy and couldn't help but wipe her hands on her clothes. Ro-yi didn't notice her expression and led the group into the forest. They returned not long after, carrying 2 rabbits and a pheasant in their hands. It looked like they'd had quite a bountiful harvest. However, when they piled these bloody things in front of Miss Ro-yi, she looked like she was about to faint. Ro-yi looked very angry. Xiao He, you told me that you were proficient in cooking. It wasn't just a lie, was it? Of course not, it wasn't. Xiao He shook her head like a rattle drum and quickly said, My cooking skills are very, very good. It's just that I can't bear to see these bloody things. Ruyi was so angry that she couldn't say anything. If a kitchen maid could not bear to see things with blood, then she could only stir-fry vegetables all day long. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that saving this useless woman was simply a waste of time. Ro-yi coldly ordered the 2 burly men under her to move the prey to the stream and wash them. Then she brought the food back for Xiao He to cook. Xiao He's cooking skills could be said to be that it was an extremely tragic sight. When the battle-crazed mercenary group returned without any success, they saw Miss Ro-yi staring at a girl in front of her with a dark face, loudly reprimanding and lecturing her. You don't know how to cook. Miss Ro-yi was so angry that she threw the burnt and ugly rabbit on the grill at Xiao He. The rabbit was roasted until it was scalding hot. When it was thrown onto Xiao He's body, it was so hot that she couldn't help but cry out, "Young master, please spare me." She actually rolled towards Miss Ro-yi's brother and stretched out her jade-like arms, about to hug the young master. Miss Ro-yi was so angry that her face turned red. Chapter 23:33. Baby Qiao was chewing on a piece of meat and holding it in her mouth, almost forgetting to swallow it. Emo Lien couldn't help but laugh at her little appearance. She raised a hand to rub her little face and said softly, "Eat." Xiao Mu moved her small mouth and swallowed the food, her eyes darting around as she surveyed the lively scene on the other side. Young Master Chen's expression didn't change at all. With a flick of his sleeve, he swept away Xiao He who had pounced on him. He allowed her to fall heavily on her back next to the pile of charred food. This young Master Chen completely treated her as a piece of trash and didn't even spare her a glance. Miss Ro-yi walked over and slapped her cheek without any trace of politeness. "Lowly servant, what are you thinking? Do you think that you're a celestial immortal? Do you think my big brother would fancy a piece of trash like you? What kind of joke was this? How many of the noble ladies in the capital ran after her brother? Her brother didn't even look at a single one of them. Not to mention a shrew in the countryside. Where did she get the confidence to think that such a cold and noble person like her brother would fancy a foolish woman like her? Why would I save a piece of trash like you with that cheap face of yours? My brother has good taste. No wonder he didn't approve of me taking you in at first sight. You're courting death by causing trouble." Miss Ro-yi felt that her new servant girl was an utter disgrace to her. Without hesitation, she stretched out her leg and kicked Xiao He, sending her rolling on the ground. You can scram now? Our Mu family can't afford a lowly servant girl like you with ulterior motives. Sir Jojo, who had been watching the show with his mouth agape, was startled when he heard this. The Mu family? She surreptitiously sized up the siblings and happened to see the young master looking at her with a deep gaze. Her gaze seemed to be very infectious. It was bottomless and vast like smoke. Just one glance was enough to make Jojo's heart skip a beat. A strange feeling arose in her heart. It was an unusually strange feeling, just like when she discovered Long Chuyun in the wilderness of the secret realm. A small trace of suspicion arose in her heart. She didn't know why before. But now, she was very certain that this was the attraction of bloodlines. At the same time that she was sizing up Mu Xingqian was also intently sizing her up. When his pitch-black and deep eyes looked at Xiao Mu, he himself could sense that the blood flowing in his veins was clamoring for a surging emotion in his heart. Mo Lien naturally noticed that the little fellow and another man were staring at each other for a long time. Although he didn't know what was going on, he still turned the little fellow's head back protectively. What's wrong? Arbor blinked and picked up a piece of deer meat in his hand. He tore a piece and chewed it. I don't know. It's definitely not a good thing to see someone from the Mu family. Mo Lien was aware of the knot between her and the Mu clan. She couldn't help but laugh. She glanced in the direction of Mu Xingqian and the rest. Ignore them. Let's set up camp after we finish eating. They had originally wanted to hurry to their accommodation, but Arbor suddenly called for them to stop. Then, they got off the carriage to clean up the crystal mines here. Mo Lien and Arbor discussed for a while and decided to set up camp here to rest for the night. They would continue their journey tomorrow. Anyway, the environment here was good, so they weren't in a hurry to rush to the next stop. Zhou Huan and the rest naturally didn't have any objections. They were a group of boorish men who could eat and live anywhere. Chapter 23:34. Miss, have we met before? Mu Xingqian suddenly asked. The moment he spoke, Zhou Huan and the others laughed shamefully. Damn, I say, this young master, isn't your opening line to strike up a conversation with a lady a bit too old-fashioned? Isn't that so? We don't have to do that anymore. Mu Xingqian didn't pay attention to Zhou Huan and the others' sarcasm. His gaze was still fixed on the back of Arbor's head, and he said with determination, I have a strange feeling about you. Mu Ro E! Exclamation point. TSK, my big brother, you're really something today. The cold-blooded ice heart that hadn't moved for 1,000 years was inexplicably moved by a girl he'd only met once. If news of this spread back to the capital, all the young ladies and young wives would cry themselves to death. Be big brother. Mu Ro E wanted to pinch herself. What the hell was she doing? Why was she stuttering? It was obvious that her brother was the one in the wrong. It wasn't right to run up to a girl and strike up a conversation, especially when there was a covetous fiancé squatting next to her. Big brother, cough, it seems that there are no more ores here. Why don't we go somewhere else? Not only was her stomach full of anger from eating, but her big brother was also acting strangely. Mu Ro E felt very tired. Mu Xingqian stared at Xiao Mu without moving or blinking. Although the young lady had only shown him the back of her head from beginning to end, Mu Xingqian did not know why, but he felt that he could also feel the excitement of the blood flowing through his body when he looked at the back of this little fellow's head. I think I'm familiar with you. Mu Xingqian said. My name is Mu Xingqian. May I know your name? Prince Simo couldn't bear it anymore and returned a cold glare. I'm not familiar with you. Don't pretend to be family halfway. Miss Xiao He, who was lying on the ground, felt that the jealousy in her heart was about to burn her clean. None of these damned men put her, Xiao He, in their eyes. That young Master Qin, from the first time she saw him, had always had a cold face and kept people 1,000 miles away. Just now, he had brushed her aside so coldly, completely treating her as a smear of dirt that would stain his clothes. He had brushed her aside cleanly. She said that his temperament had always been cold, and he did not know what tenderness was. Who would have thought that he would shamelessly chase after a girl, wanting to know her name? The Mu family. That was what the lofty Miss Softclothes had said just now. From this, It could be seen that they were truly aristocratic families from the imperial capital. How could she leave so easily? At this moment, Xiaohe had crawled to Mu Rouyi's feet and cried as she hugged her leg and begged for mercy, causing Mu Rouyi to be extremely annoyed. Mu Rouyi was currently worrying about her elder brother's matters. How could she have the time to argue with this lowly servant? She directly kicked her away and roared, "Get lost!" He turned his face to the side and looked at his elder brother, Mu Xingchen, with furrowed brows. His elder brother had always been cold, aloof, and arrogant. When had he ever been so persistent and wanted to ask for the name of a young lady? Miss Qiao turned her delicate, snow-white face and expressionlessly looked at Mu Xingchen. "I'm not familiar with you." "Impossible." Mu Xingchen stubbornly shook his head. "Little girl, I can sense that you're different. In the sea of thousands of people and the boundless stars, I can recognize you at a glance." Chapter 23:35. Mu Rouyi's jaw dropped. She then looked at the burly men around her. Every single one of them was so shocked that their eyeballs seemed to have fallen out of their sockets. Holy shit! Elder brother is really something. Look at these words of love, right? What sea of people? What vast stars? What can I recognize you at a glance? These words of love were endless. No wonder the face of the guy beside the little girl darkened. It was indeed unbearable, wasn't it? How can you speak so carelessly in front of someone else's lover? Elder brother, I can't help you anymore. With a stoic face, our dear Qiao Mu sized up Mu Xingchen from head to toe. Scram! Everyone! Brave warrior! She was the only one who dared to shout at the genius young master of a talisman family in China. Mu Rouyi twitched her mouth, and it was only now that she carefully examined Xiao Mu from head to toe again. Little sister, throw it? Who's your little sister? Arbor's cold face met Mu Rouyi's warm face with a warm smile. The latter's expression stiffened. She coughed lightly and said, "Little, cough, cough, little girl. Actually, my elder brother doesn't mean any harm. Don't throw it. Don't throw it. Holy shit, what kind of person is this? Why did he throw blue fireballs without saying anything?" Mu Rouyi's eyes twitched when she saw the fireballs being thrown over. Don't go overboard. You're going overboard, little girl. You're going overboard. Fuck. 17 or 18 small fireballs whizzed over and smashed towards her and her elder brother's faces without any explanation. Damn it, don't hit people's faces. Mu Rou immediately flicked out 2 defensive talismans to protect herself. On the other side, her elder brother's expression was as calm as the wind and clouds. There was even a hair-raising smile hanging at the corner of his mouth. He gently took out a talisman and blocked in front of the fireballs. Bam bam bam. The blue fireballs landed outside the defensive circle one after another. She thought that her elder brother's yellow-level defensive talisman would be able to block the fireballs. Who knew that Mu Rouyi opened her mouth and quickly retreated a few steps. She cowardly hid behind her elder brother. When he looked up, he saw his elder brother waving his sleeves and extinguishing the small fireballs that had broken through his defense. Mu Rouyi didn't say anything, but she was cursing in her heart. This damned girl was really fucking serious. The small fireball that she threw out was actually able to break through the yellow-grade defensive talisman circle. If she hadn't made the prompt decision to hide behind Big Brother, she reckoned that she would have been injured by now. Stinky girl. Mu Rouyi jumped up with her hands on her hips. However, before he could start cursing, he saw the other party's actions and his eyes bulged. What the fuck, you're still doing it? Little meteor shower. Arbor's merciless change in attitude was truly intoxicating. Zhou Huan and the others, who were originally sitting beside her and eating barbecue, quickly jumped up and retreated with the food in their hands. On the other end, Miss Qiao had already leaped up. The black light of the ferrule in her hand flowed as she shouted. Hundreds and thousands of little blue fireballs smashed towards Mu Xingchen and Mu Ri. Mu Rouyi really wanted to cry. She had never seen a girl like this in her entire life. Who would start a fight with you for no reason without saying anything? Furthermore, This mysterious strength of hers seemed a little frightening. Mu Ro-yi turned around and saw the battle-crazed mercenary group hiding behind a row of trees. Only half of their heads were sticking out as they vigilantly looked over. Chapter 23:36. The group of bastards from the Berserk Battle Mercenary Group were more than 10 meters away from the siblings. He had already found a place to hide and was prepared to avoid the attack. This bunch of useless bastards. Mu Ro-yi was furious. In the next second, she abandoned her big brother and ran away in a panic. She kept muttering, "Big brother, don't force yourself." Mu Xingchen looked expressionlessly at the pile of small blue fireballs that were flying towards him. A jade talisman array appeared around his body. 24 pieces of jade talismans formed a yellow-level defensive talisman array, and it suddenly lit up beside him. Abundant talisman power enveloped his entire body. In an instant, his tall and straight figure appeared exceptionally tall, handsome, and otherworldly in the world. Bang 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 bang. After a round of wild explosions, the man stood in the defensive array and looked at Arbor with a calm expression. His eyes dimmed a little. He didn't know what he was feeling, but he was a little depressed. He had been cold to people since he was young. He thought that his personality was like this, but today, he inexplicably felt that he almost couldn't recognize himself. Could it be that he wasn't a cold-hearted person? Arbor glared at Mu Xingchen angrily. Why didn't it even hit the corner of his clothes? Great meteor shower. Everyone. Too much. Too much, little girl. Little girl. Mu Ro-yi, who was hiding behind the tree, was like the group of bastards from the Berserk Battle Mercenary Group. She only stuck her head out from behind the tree, stretched out her fingers, and shouted anxiously. Zhou Huan and the others were speechless. Could it be that the name of the eldest Miss Spiritual Technique was from a book, or did she just casually make it up? Why did it sound so weird? Mo Lian's mouth twitched, but she knew her little wife very well. This was definitely not the original Spiritual Technique name. It was just that the little guy had made up a small meteor to make it easier to distinguish. Qi Hua and the others' jaws dropped. When they looked up and saw the large meteor shower, they, who were in the same camp, couldn't help but take dozens of steps back. Holy shit, young miss is too fierce. Every ball of blue fire in this large meteor shower was the size of a wash basin. Compared to the small meteor shower he had played with before, it was much stronger. Let's talk nicely. Young lady. Mu Ro-yi jumped out from behind the tree, but in less than 3 seconds, she hurriedly moved back more than 10 meters to avoid the incoming heat wave. Fuck, this temperamental grandaunt is getting serious. Crackle, crackle, crackle. A flaming meteor instantly broke through the defensive array glyphs, and a large number of fireballs smashed towards Mu Xingchen. In the nick of time, Mu Xingchen brandished a long sword in his hand and slashed forward with a heat wave. He had already moved out along the path that had been opened up. The entire large meteor shower instantly smashed into the air, directly smashing a deep crater in the ground. The commotion caused the beasts on the outskirts of the 8 desolate mountain range to roar in fear. Arbor blinked and lowered his head to look at his little hand. He was a little dazed and cute. It didn't hit? Mu Xingchen isn't just a yellow-level great talisman master. His cultivation is also far above yours. It's impossible for someone who controls 9 levels of spiritual fire to be hurt by the blue spiritual cleansing flame. As expected, he was a genius. No wonder old Bai, who was by Mu Jingrui's side, was so fanatical in protecting their young master. It was time to sleep. Chapter 23:37. Was she a genius with extraordinary talent? If that was the case, Arbor's gaze turned cold. With a flick of his finger, dozens of 8 trigrams binding talismans flew up and rushed toward Mu Xingchen. At the same time, attack talismans and 5 spirit talismans followed suit. It was as if they were going to smash Mu Xingchen to death. A stream of wind appeared in the little girl's hand, and she pounced in front of Mu Xingchen without any warning. The 3 lightning spirit talismans in her hand had already descended from the sky and were smashing down fiercely. The battle-crazed mercenary group was on the verge of collapse. If they had to use a word to describe their current feelings, it would probably be the feeling of 10,000 heads running through their hearts. Lightning Spirit Talisman. 5 Spirit Talisman. What talisman is that? Mu-Ro-E had already come out from behind the tree. Her mouth was agape as she stared at the girl who was about the same age as her in shock. What was going on? An unfamiliar girl's talisman skills were actually more outstanding than all the young disciples of the talisman patrician family? Could it be that she was still dreaming? Was what she was seeing not real? However, seeing that her elder brother was temporarily unable to break free from the effects of the 8 trigrams binding talismans, Mu-Ro-Ye's eyes truly flashed with a trace of uncertainty. Elder brother. Super large meteor shower. Miss Chiao leapt high into the air. She was already floating in the air as she looked down expressionlessly. The ferrule, which was connected to her mind, came out from under her sleeve with a whoosh and went straight for Mu Xingqian's head. Mu-Ro-Ye's pupils shrank as she screamed. Emolien. Zhou Huan and the others' jaws once again dropped to the ground. They thought that the Great Meteor Shower was the ultimate move that eldest Miss could use at the moment. But they didn't expect that there was actually a super meteor shower in this world. They really knelt down before eldest Miss. Was she really a human and not a demon? Mu Xingqian was temporarily immobilized by 4 or 5 8 trigrams binding talismans. When he looked up, he saw bursts of lightning accompanied by dark clouds and a large fiery meteor shower smashing down on top of his head. Time seemed to have stopped. Everyone was filled with trepidation and cold sweat, waiting for the arrival of the thunder fire. However, all of the attacks stopped in that instant. The thick flaming meteor nebula covered the sky above Mu Xingqian's head. It stopped. The little girl looked down coldly at the man who was standing still under the encirclement of attack talismans. There wasn't the slightest fluctuation in her eyes as she just looked at him coldly. Step by step, he walked up to him and asked coldly, "Why aren't you fighting back?" "I don't want to." This inexplicable feeling of bloodline resonance made him particularly reluctant to attack her. Not at all. He did not want to hurt her, not even the slightest bit. Mu Xingqian frowned slightly. Arbor glanced at him coldly and leaned in a few inches. She stared into his dark and still eyes and said word by word, "Mu clan, you better not provoke me again. Otherwise, when I get angry, I'll turn your entire Mu clan upside down and make you wish you were dead. Remember what I said today." Arbor glanced at him coldly. "I hope that day doesn't come. Miss, may I know your name?" "Not a single person from the Mu clan deserves to know my name." Chapter 23:38. Arbor coldly turned his head and glanced at him. With a light wave of her hand, she removed all of the talismans on Mu Xingqian's body. The meteor shower above their heads also slowly dissipated, leaving only a trace of terrifying pressure in the air, proving that everything just now was not a dream. "Mississippi, how did the Mu family offend you? Can you tell me?" "Elder brother." Mu-Ro-E was about to go crazy from anxiety. Elder brother's persistence today seemed very unusual. He clearly knew that the girl did not like the Mu family, but he still kept pestering her. Arbor's cold gaze shot behind him. Scram! The little white snake on his wrist flew out and rolled in the sky in an instant, turning into a ferocious giant snake bigger than a mountain range. Its tail swept down, and there was a loud boom. Half of the mountaintop here was shocked by the terrifying vibrations. The little spirit beasts in the forest all hugged their heads and screamed, trembling as they knelt on the ground. The terrifying pressure of the ancient great void serpent shrouded the entire mountaintop. Which spirit beast dared to act rashly? Mu-Ro-E was so shocked that she fell on her butt. Looking back, Quang Zhan and the other men were already crouching on the ground in fright. Their eyes were filled with terror as they stared in front of them. The giant snake coiled its huge body and floated in the air. Its long tail gently wrapped around the girl. In front of such a giant snake, she was so small that she could be ignored. However, it was this girl with an emotionless expression who was coldly looking at all of them from across a deep ravine. Gully. The giant snake's tail had directly carved out a huge, bottomless crack from left to right on this perfectly fine hillside. If any of them accidentally fell, They would not be able to cry even if they wanted to. Mo Lien slowly walked up and lowered his head to look at that deep crevice. He then raised his head to look at the bewildered Mu Xingchen before letting out a long sigh. The gap between Jojo and the Mu family was like a ravine in front of them. The conflict was so deep that it was impossible to cross it. Mu Xingchen didn't know why, but when he looked at the little girl's emotionless face and her eyes that were as cold as 1,000 years of frost, his heart felt extremely uncomfortable. "You can leave now," Mo Lien said to Mu Xingchen. She stepped forward and gently held Arbor's bone-chilling hand. A warm stream of energy flowed from his palm to hers. Arbor's heart skipped a beat. He turned his head and looked at Qin Lai's eyes, which were as dark as night. "Do you want to eat osmanthus candy?" Mo Lien took out a small, square silver box and gently waved it in front of her. "I'm not a child," Arbor mumbled and stuffed a small piece of osmanthus candy into her mouth. "How is it? Not bad, right?" Mo Lien smiled and held her little hand. Then she turned and walked towards Zhou Huan and the others, who were frozen stiff. The giant snake's cold gaze fell on Mu Xingchen for a moment. Then, it turned into a little white snake and flew up to Arbor's wrist again. "Sweet." The little girl wrinkled her little nose. Mo Lien reached out and poked her little face. "Of course it's sweet. Because when I made this osmanthus candy, I wrapped all my blessings in it." Chapter 2339. Arbor stared blankly for a moment before looking up at him. "You made this?" Mo Lien nodded with a smile. "Jojo gave me a pot of flowers, so I naturally had to return the favor." Arbor pursed his lips and silently reached out his little paw to take the small silver box from his father's hand. He expressionlessly stuffed it into his little waist pouch. Mo Lien burst into laughter and suddenly picked up the little fellow. "Jojo, are you happy?" "I'm all right." Arbor nodded his little head and gave him a lively look. Mo Lien laughed heartily, picked up the little fellow, and ran into the depths of the forest. "We'll set up camp here tonight." What he didn't say was that his little emperor had made such a big commotion earlier, so he was sure that no spirit or profound beast would dare to come to their camp to die at night. Phew! Zhou Huan and the others let out a long sigh of relief. It was only now that they came back to their senses. When Eldest Miss was angry earlier, they all felt as if there was a heavy aura pressing down on their hearts, causing them to keep quiet out of fear. They didn't even dare to utter a single word. It was only now that they felt a trace of the warmth of spring and the blooming of flowers looking at the giant snake that suddenly appeared. Its aura was so strong that they had never seen or heard of it before. It was only now that they understood that they had only seen 1,000th of Eldest Miss's methods. Mu Ro-yi finally collected her emotions and walked towards her brother, Mu Xingchen, who was standing there in a daze. She lightly coughed and said, "Big brother, big brother?" Mu Xingchen suddenly turned his head and said to her, "Ro-yi, take them and continue to look for those ores in the 8 desolate mountain range. I'm going home first." "Big brother, tee." Mu Ro-yi opened her small mouth and was about to ask her brother why he was going back, but she saw that Mu Xingchen had already summoned his flying beast, Song Shui, a divine beast, 6-winged blood lion. He turned around and quickly flew into the sky. "Big brother! Big brother!" Mu Ro-yi looked at the sky in shock. After a while, her small face fell. What elder brother did today was really too illogical. She raised her eyes and looked at the deep trench in front of everyone. She let out a long sigh, turned around, and decisively led the Berserker mercenary group and the Mu family away. If that young lady was serious, none of them would be able to leave this place alive. The night passed in silence. In the middle of the night, Arbor hid in Paradise Planet. He drew a lot of talismans and cultivated for a while. Then he returned to his tent, feeling refreshed. At this time, the first glimmer of dawn had already appeared. A familiar aroma of porridge slowly drifted into her tent and lingered in her nose. Arbor reached out and lifted the curtain. Under the morning light, she saw a man dressed in a plain robe. He seemed to have sensed her presence and turned his head. A hint of gentleness flashed across his face as he reached out and beckoned to her. "Her lotus!" Miss Chiao's eyes lit up. She shuttled forward like a little butterfly and threw herself into his embrace. She rubbed her little face against his clothes and suddenly raised her little head. She stared at him with sparkling eyes and said, "You didn't wipe your face. Stinks." Emolien was about to laugh out loud, and he leaned over to kiss her small face. "Who told you to be my wife? I can despise anyone, but I can't despise you." Arbor grinned and reached out a pair of small hands to hang on him. She rubbed against him for a while. "I'll rub you together." Stinks. Chapter 2340. After breakfast, Old Man Chen ate and drank to his heart's content. With a face full of joy, he continued his journey towards the outskirts of the 8 desolate mountain range. Their next stop was naturally the southern part of the city. If they hadn't encountered an incident like yesterday, they would have probably reached the southern part of the city by dusk. Old Man Chen was a shrewd person. At this time, he understood that the young masters and young misses accompanying them were not simple people. He only needed to focus on driving the carriage. As for the rest, he would naturally leave it to the young masters and young misses. Arbor sat in the carriage and flipped through the medical book for a while before putting it away. She lifted the curtain and poked her head out. "Husband." Emolien slightly tightened his grip on the reins and turned to look at her. Emolien turned to look and saw a stalk of medicinal herb growing under a banyan tree. It looked to be in good condition. Arbor watched as he whipped the horse forward and straightforwardly picked up the medicinal herb and handed it to her. Miss Chiao blinked and gave him a sweet smile that she didn't even notice. The beautiful smile on her palm-sized face instantly captivated Prince Mo's eyes. "Husband, why do you keep looking at me? Jojo is good-looking." Emolien wanted to abandon the horse and get on the carriage. However, when he thought about how his little wife could order him to pick the medicinal herb at any time, he extinguished that strong urge. "Husband, I'm going to sleep for a while. I'll call you when it's time for lunch." The two of them looked at each other. Seeing the little fellow's sticky eyes, Emolien couldn't help but raise his hand to touch her little face. "Woo, I really want to hug her and keep her in my arms. Forget it, I'll let the little fellow sleep for a while." Arbor retracted her little neck. Just as she was about to close her eyes and rest, she suddenly felt a golden flash in her conscious. The little fellow, who was familiar with the routine, couldn't help but feel happy. Looking at this situation, it seemed that the golden talisman Jade Tome was about to release a new technique. Could it be that her diligent practice of drawing talismans had some results? Could she now learn the contents of the 9th Jade Slip of the Golden Talisman Jade Tome? She was very happy as she waited for the Golden Talisman Jade Tome to release a new Jade Slip so that she could learn the Earth Grade Talisman technique. Suddenly, a talisman flew out of nowhere. Miss Chiao glanced at it. The talismans that could be stored in her inner world were naturally drawn by her own hands. Of course, she only needed a glance to recognize this soul-departing talisman. However, why would it fly out of its inner world on its own today? Arbor was gathering a strand of his spiritual sense, intending to control his lazy spiritual sense avatar to check on the Golden Talisman Jade Tome in his conscious. Suddenly, a blue light burst out in front of him. That inexplicable and strange soul-leaving talisman suddenly rushed towards her glabella. Arbor was too shocked to react. The soul-departing talisman was a talisman that allowed the soul to leave the body and speed up the cultivation of the soul sense. The problem was, why did this soul separation talisman suddenly appear at this time? A talisman force rushed into her glabella without any explanation. Arbor's eyes were filled with shock as she realized that she was drifting away from her body, pulled out by an indescribably tyrannical force. Bang! The body in the carriage fell to the ground without any reaction. Arbor's soul thought brushed past Prince Mo, who was galloping over on his horse. Prince Mo suddenly pulled on the reins of his horse and looked in the direction where Arbor was drifting away. There was nothing at all. He lifted the curtain of the carriage. What happened to Jojo? Chapter 2341. Jojo? Emolien immediately realized that something was wrong with the little fellow. Although this little fellow's sleeping posture was not good, she would not be sprawled out in the middle of the carriage like this. Jojo, Jojo. Mo Lien leaped onto the carriage and hugged her to his chest. He lowered his head and called her name over and over again. After a long while, he did not see any reaction from his little wife. Mo Lien's heart started to panic. He hugged her and shook her gently. Jojo? What was going on? He checked and found that Jojo's body was very normal. Her breathing was also very calm. However, she did not open her eyes. It was as if she had completely blocked out his voice. He subconsciously tightened his grip on the vine in his hand. After waiting for 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, Mo Lien pulled open the curtain and shouted at Old Chin in panic, Go to the clinic. Go to the nearest clinic. Hurry! What happened, young master? Zhou Huan and the rest hurried over and asked with a serious expression. Jojo, Jojo? Mo Lien lowered his head and looked at the unresponsive arbor. He was inexplicably flustered. In an instant, all his calmness disappeared. Is eldest miss sick? Zhou Huan asked loudly. Then what are we waiting for? Young master, why don't you take the flying beast back to the city? Previously, the young master had not been in a hurry, so he had accompanied the little lady on a scenic tour back to the capital. However, now that something like this had happened, he naturally had to hurry back to the city. They all knew that besides eldest Mrs. Ancient Fire Phoenix, the young master's flying beast was not simple either. Her words woke him up from his dream. Mo Lien's heart was in a complete mess. When he heard Zhou Huan's reminder, he hurriedly carried the warm and soft Jojo and jumped off the carriage. He waved his hand and called 7th Yan out. Everyone leaped onto the golden dragon 7th Yan's back. The golden dragon waved its tail in the air and flew into the sky in an instant. It really only took a breath. Old Chen then disappeared from the sight of the young masters. Old Chen was quite helpless. Looking at the empty carriage, he muttered to himself, That old man is now going back to the border town? Or should we go back? When the sky above the southern city was enveloped by the might of an ancient dragon, the guards of the South City, as well as the officials of the entire South City, all ran out of their mansions with shocked expressions on their faces. The golden dragon was flying so high that they couldn't see the people on it. They could only vaguely see that there was more than one person on the golden dragon's back. No, I don't know which senior was passing by. My little South City, please accept my respect, is willing to listen to your Excellency's orders. A civil official from the southern city trembled as he walked to the front row and said respectfully under the threatening gaze of the guard. A cold and anxious voice passed through the layers of clouds and pressed heavily on the hearts of all the officials. Within 15 minutes, gather all the local pill refiners, doctors, and pharmacists. Have them all come to the Yunheng Inn. He didn't have the time to waste on people. After he finished speaking, he carried Arbor to the Yunheng Inn where they were staying. The guards of the southern city immediately gathered the best doctors in the city and rushed to the inn together. Mo Lien held Xiao Mu's small hand and called out to her with knitted brows for a while. Then, with a gloomy face, he abruptly pulled open the door and glared at the crowd of physicians of all ages outside. Come on, all of you. See what's going on. Chapter 2342. Yes. The group of physicians hurried forward submissively and checked Miss Chiao's pulse. Then, they all looked at each other in bewilderment. This young lady's pulse is healthy and strong. Her body is very healthy. Then why isn't she waking up from her coma? Mo Lien roared. Zhou Huan and the others, who were standing at the door, couldn't help but shudder. Are all the physicians in South City here? Is there anyone better? The group of physicians suddenly wanted to cry but had no tears. Although Southern City was not big, the top few doctors in Southern City were also famous all over the world. Now, this handsome man in front of them had a terrifying expression, as if he had swallowed a meteor. It was as if they couldn't explain themselves, it was very likely that they wouldn't be able to walk out of this inn. You bunch of quacks. If you can't cure me, Jojo, I'll decapitate all of you. Bang! The door was suddenly pushed open forcefully. Fong Su's wooden face suddenly appeared at the door with a trace of pleasant surprise on his face. This General Fong Su greets Your Highness the Crown Prince. Great, His Highness really came back as expected. He didn't stay in South City for so long in vain. He could finally return to the imperial capital and report to His Majesty the Emperor. But one of the physicians was so frightened that he collapsed to the ground, the medicine in his hands spilling onto the ground. The person in front of them was actually His Highness the Crown Prince? Fong Su, immediately go and gather all the talisman masters near South City. And talisman masters? At this moment, Mo Lien suddenly remembered the soul exchange talisman that Jojo had mentioned before. His heart couldn't help but skip a beat. He inexplicably felt that Jojo's current situation should be related to that strange talisman technique. Talisman masters? Hadn't talisman masters disappeared from the divine continent for hundreds of years? Occasionally, the charm masters who were exposed would also be arrested and sentenced to death. Wasn't His Highness the Crown Prince making things difficult for him? Where could he find those troublesome talisman masters? What are you standing there for? Hurry and go. At Crown Prince Mo's roar, Fong Su immediately ran outside on all fours. How could the group of soldiers dare to continue staying here and endure this temperamental Crown Prince's torrential anger? They hurriedly turned around and ran after Fong Su. After Fong Su led the group of soldiers away, Mo Lien's cold gaze once again fell on the leading doctor from South City. What are you all standing there for? Continue the treatment. If you can't find a way, then think of a plan overnight. All the doctors were speechless. While Prince Mo was going crazy, Miss Chiao pitifully watched as the Crown Prince brushed past her. She stretched out her two slender arms and grabbed nothing but air around the Crown Prince's neck. That's right, I'm just a soul right now. Even my connection with the sapling has been cut off. Lotus must be worried to death after discovering her abnormality, but she didn't even have the ability to send him a message. It's all because of that damned soul-departing talisman. Awa, why did it fly out on its own? Why did it so coincidentally activate the talisman in front of her? Was it because of the golden talisman jade tome? Wasn't it? Arbor silently swallowed her bitterness and pitifully watched herself wander under the boundless sky like a wandering soul. Wandering from day to night, this feeling evoked an inexplicable sense of familiarity. It was as if, a long, long time ago, she had also wandered like this. On the first day of wandering, Jojo missed Mo Lien. On the second day of wandering, Jojo still missed Mo Lien. Chapter 2343. The Mu family of the Divine Land was a talisman family. The talisman family was located in a green mountain forest. The surrounding mountains were the cultivation places of the Mu family. If one looked down from the sky, they would find that the whole talisman family was roughly divided into 4 areas like a large courtyard house. The south was the cultivation area, and the north was the meeting hall. The east was the rest area, and the west was a special elixir room for alchemists. On the Divine Land, almost every big family would pay attention to cultivating alchemists in the family since 100 years ago. These alchemists were naturally important to the family. The pills they developed might one day allow their entire family to rise to a whole new level. Therefore, alchemists always had a high status in the family. A group of disciples who were training their tendons and veins in the southern square suddenly heard a roar in the air and raised their heads one after another. Half of the disciples cheered when they saw him. Young Master is back. Young Master is back so early? Didn't they say that the task of collecting ores in the Ba Huang mountain range would take a long time? In the discussion of the disciples, Mu Xingchen put away the 6-winged blood lion with a cold face, waved his sleeves, and swept past the crowd. Why is young Master in such a hurry? I don't know. It seems that he is going in the direction of the Gilded Garden to find Madam. Passing through the veranda of the Gilded Garden, Mu Xingchen came to the front of the main hall and saw a pair of calligraphy couplets. The courtyard is full of elegant pavilions, and Xiaoyu is Gu Qingqiu. These words were written by his father, and they were like him. They were arrogant and freehand. Mu Qingya was sitting in the central room. When she heard the news that her eldest son was back, she couldn't sit still and quickly stood up. As soon as she went to the door, she saw Mu Xingchen stride in. Mother. Mu Xingchen stopped and bowed slightly. Mu Qingya looked like she was in her 30s. Her face was gentle and soft, and there was a hint of melancholy in her eyes all year round. When she saw her eldest son, there was a bit of joy in her eyes. Her voice was also soft and soft. Qin, didn't you say that this trip will take more than a month? You are back so soon. Do you want to give me a surprise? Mu Xingchen said respectfully, It's my fault for making mother worry. I encountered some matters and had some doubts, so I traveled day and night to come back and see mother. Qin, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. I'll tell you everything I know. Mu Qingya stepped forward and took her son's hand. She smiled and sat down with him on the carved string chair. Mother, you mentioned to me before that when that person left the Mu family, she was 3 months pregnant? Mu Qingya nodded affirmatively. Yes, I did. Qin, why are you suddenly asking about this? She lowered her eyes and let out a long sigh. When your biological mother broke up with your father and left the Mu family, you were only 5 years old. Sigh, this has always been a regret in my heart. For the sake of the Long family, big sister Yun actually. Mu Qingya saw that Mu Xingchen did not pursue the matter, so she said, Child, if you have any questions, you can ask mother. Mother will tell you everything she knows. But what you did to your mother? Mu Xingchen interrupted Mu Qingya and coldly said, I don't want to know everything about her. Chapter 23:44. You silly child. Mu Qingya patted his hand unhappily. I've been telling you this all this time. I've been telling you that your birth mother must have her own reasons for abandoning you. Anyone can blame him, you can't blame her. That's your biological mother. Child, this blood relationship can't be cut off. You might not have any recollection of it, but I can tell you with certainty that before your birth mother left the Mu family, she loved and cherished you. Her love for you is definitely not any less than mother's love for you. Mother, Mu Xingchen interrupted her coldly, his eyes cold and aloof. I won't say anything else. Mu Qingya sighed and looked at him worriedly. You've grown up now and have your own thoughts and plans. But I want to tell you one thing. No matter how old you are, you're still my child. There are some things you don't like to hear, but I still hope you can listen to them. I understand, mother. Mu Xingchen nodded lightly. Mu Qingya asked again, Good child, why did you suddenly mention that she's 3 months pregnant? Mother, 2 days ago, the 8 desolate mountain range, I met a girl about Ro Yi's age, Mu Xingchen hurriedly said. Mu Xingchen hurriedly said, The moment I saw her, my bloodline involuntarily resonated with her. What? Mu Qingya widened her eyes in shock, then a hint of joy appeared on her face. You mean? Yes. Mu Xingchen nodded with certainty. I suspect that she's my biological sister. It's that woman who took the child away from the Mu family. Mu Qingya jumped up from the bench and said excitedly, This matter is too important. I'm going to tell your father now. Wait, mother. Mu Xingchen also stood up and grabbed Mu Qingya's sleeve. Let's talk about this later. There's no rush. How can there be no rush? Mu Qingya said anxiously. Do you know that even your grandfather sends your 7th uncle everywhere to look for this child all year round? I didn't expect that she would come here by herself. You really saw your sister with your own eyes? Mu Qingya's eyes lit up as she looked at Mu Xingchen, the gloominess in her eyes instantly disappearing. Mu Xingchen could feel his mother's joy, and the corner of his mouth couldn't help but curl up into a smile. She's very beautiful. I've never seen such a cute girl before. She's also very powerful. Mu Xingchen looked at Mu Qingya. Mother, shall we bring her back? Good. Mu Qingya nodded repeatedly, and she couldn't help but tear up a little. Your grandfather will be overjoyed when he hears this news. Let's go and talk to your father. When your grandfather comes out of seclusion, tell him the good news. The fondness in Mu Xingchen's eyes dimmed slightly. Mother, what if she hates us? How come? Mu Qingya was shocked and hurriedly turned to look at her son. Son, did something happen? A hint of hatred surged in Mu Xingchen's eyes. It must be that woman. It's her. She was the one who taught my sister to hate us. It must be her. It can't be. Mu Qingya hurriedly waved her hands in denial. You must have misunderstood your biological mother. Chapter 23:45. Child, listen to mother. Your biological mother is a straightforward and magnanimous person. She definitely wouldn't teach your sister this, Mu Qingya said with certainty. No matter how great her hatred for our Mu family is, she won't blame her on your sister. She won't transfer this hatred to your sister and let her bear all of this. Mother, don't put in a good word for her anymore. All these years, I've seen clearly and know what kind of person she is. Mu Xingchen sneered. Mu Qingya was so angry that she stomped her feet and sat down heavily with a sulk. Mu Xingchen turned and bowed to her. Mother, my sister holds a deep grudge against our Mu family. Don't tell father and grandfather about this for now. We'll talk about it after I find her. Mu Qingya turned and glared at her son. How can we do that? Your father must know about such an important matter. Let's put off your grandfather's matter for now. All right then. I'll have to trouble you with this matter. Mu Qingya sighed and stared faintly at the tall and handsome young man in front of her. Cheng, come here. Mu Xingchen walked over and sat down in front of Mu Qingya. Mu Qingya pursed her lips and reached out to hold his hand. I raised you single-handedly, so I know what kind of person you are. You're a good child. It'd be even better if you could let go of your resentment against your biological mother. I don't blame her. It was just that she didn't deserve any of his attention. To him, the woman who had abandoned his son when he was young was nothing more than a stranger in the past. But now, because of his sister's hatred for the Mu family, he had no choice but to face that vicious woman head-on. If it weren't for her teaching, how could his sister harbor such great enmity against the Mu family? Mu Qingya knew that this child had a deep grudge against Long Chuyun, and it wasn't a problem that could be solved with just a few words. She could only subtly talk about Long Chuyun in hopes of alleviating the child's hatred for his biological mother. Mother, I plan to spend some time by her side until she's willing to come home with me. What do you think? Mu Qingya looked at the child she had raised with a gentle gaze. She nodded and said, She's your biological sister, so of course you have to bring her back. If she's not willing, you can spend 1 day, 10 days, or even 100 days to let her know that you truly like her. Let her feel your kindness. Mu Xingchen's lips curled into a faint smile. Mother, I think so too. I'll talk to your father about this. Just do whatever you want to do. I'll support you. Thank you, Mother. Silly child, there's no need to thank me. Mu Qingya smiled. Then I'll go back and prepare. I'll bid farewell to Mother for today. After a while, I'll definitely bring sister to see you. Okay. Mu Qingya's eyes were full of smiles as she nodded and watched the young man leave. Madam, how can you bear to let eldest young master leave just like that? A young maidservant at the side puffed up her cheeks and said, Eldest young master is our Mu family's young master. Just now, his words clearly showed that the girl didn't like him very much. If we let eldest young master go to that young lady's side, wouldn't he suffer all kinds of grievances? What do you know? Mu Qingya glared at her in annoyance. How can the kinship between siblings be broken up by a few words of scolding and beating? I believe that Qin will definitely bring little sister back. Chapter 23:46. A neat woman in a green flowery coat walked in and smiled. Song Lu, don't you know our madam? Anything that can make eldest young master happy, she will raise her hand in approval. Mu Qingya glanced at her with a smile. How's the shop? Madam, don't worry. It's just a small matter. Kaidai Veranda's business is as good as ever. We've also found out where the 2 troublemakers came from. Our Kaidai Veranda service is top-notch. In the imperial capital, no one dares to be the first if we're recognized as the second. Mu Qingya looked at the woman speechlessly. You're the only one who likes to joke around. There's no such thing as being number 1 forever in this world. Anyway, you just have to put your heart into whatever you do. Yes? Mu Qingya picked up a thin yellow booklet and handed it over. It's winter now. These are the dishes that Kaidai Veranda will be focusing on for the next 3 months. Take a look. Yes, madam. The woman in the green flowery coat took the booklet with a smile and said happily, "With Madam's help, I guarantee that Kaidai Veranda will become popular in the imperial capital again. Qing Yang, keep a close eye on Precious Painting Workshop. Madam, don't worry. The flowers that Madam brought over earlier have already been made into the first batch of jewelry. They're selling very well." They chatted for a while. Mu Qingya was a little tired, so she waved her hand and dismissed everyone, leaving only Tsong Lu to serve her. Mu Qingya picked up a cup of tea and put it down heavily. She said worriedly, "Men, send a few people to follow young master. If there's any news, report it as soon as possible." With Chen Ner's cold personality, it was a little inconceivable for him to coax a little girl back. If it really didn't work, she would have to make a trip herself. "Madam." The little girl named Tsong Lu pursed her lips and said, "She's just a girl who's been wandering outside for more than 10 years. Aren't you worrying too much?" "What girl?" Mu Qingya glared at her coldly. "Don't be rude. I've spoiled you all too much and don't know the rules at all." Tsong Lu's eyes reddened. She hurriedly knelt down and lowered her head. "I'm sorry, madam. Tsong Lu said the wrong thing." Tsong Lu shouldn't have said such disrespectful words to Mississippi. Mu Qingya didn't say anything else. She just picked up the teacup again and glanced at her indifferently. Under the vast sky, the starlight formed a long river. Miss Chiao had already been wandering around for 4 days. She didn't know how many places she had wandered through in her muddle-headed state. She only felt that she was extremely miserable. It clearly had consciousness, but it did not have a physical body. It was a pitiful soul that wandered through the endless night until dawn, when the first ray of morning light illuminated the earth. What entered Miss Chiao's eyes was a vast expanse of snow. The scenery of a world of ice and snow was imprinted in her eyes. "Have I wandered to the end of the world?" Miss Chiao cursed inwardly. In any case, her body was floating around uncontrollably. During this period of time, she had thought of contacting Little Tree. However, after several futile attempts, she gave up on the idea that what the hell was this soul-leaving talisman up to? Could it be that she left her body to cultivate her spiritual sense so that she could wander around everywhere? He wondered how Lotus was doing. She wouldn't go crazy, would she? Her poor Lotus. Miss Chiao floated all the way as she watched the sun rise above the snowy plains. It was like a small half of a salted egg yolk pressing against the horizon. Rumble. The sound of horse hooves rang out in the empty snowy plains. Chapter 2347. Arbor floated and wanted to turn her head to look. Unfortunately, the little transparent body was not under her control at all. It continued to float forward. Then she saw a large group of people riding on spirit stallions rushing past her. The people on the horses were all wearing black cloaks and their hair was braided. Looking at their speed, they were heading towards the glacier in front. The leader of the group had a shiny black braid swaying around his waist. He rode on a polar ice wolf and led the group of horses as they charged forward furiously. Miss Chiao floated forward aimlessly. To put it in a funny way, the speed at which she floated was not the least bit slower than the polar ice wolf. She did not expect that after leaving her body, her soul's speed would gradually increase. Boom, 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 boom. The large group of people on the ice field made an extremely strong tremor. Arbor looked down at the transparent ice under her feet and then looked up at the group in front of her who was maintaining a constant speed. Such a big movement, but the ice field did not show any signs of cracking. It could be seen that this ice field was not formed in 1 or 2 years. The layer of ice below was probably a few stories high. Float, float, float. Boom, 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 boom. Float, float, float. Miss Chiao waved her small hands and spun her small body. She increased her speed and floated to the side of a lady on a horse. At first glance, she felt that this lady was a little familiar, but she could not remember where she had seen her before. The entrance to Heavenly Ice Snow region is in front. Everyone put in more effort, hurry up. We must reach it before noon. It will be even harder to travel at night. Everyone replied in unison. Heavenly Ice Snow region? Xiao Mu was startled, and then she thought excitedly. Oh, so this was not the end of the world. She floated all the way to a place called Heavenly Ice Snow region. She wondered which part of the divine continent was this? Knowing the name of the place was not of much use to her. Her soul floated uncontrollably, and who knew where she would go next. But looking at the current situation, it seemed that she was also floating towards heavenly ice snow region. Cough, cough. The woman on the horse was wearing a thick furry cloak, and her head was wrapped in a thick velvet cloth, only revealing a pair of pretty eyes. A gust of wind hit her in the face, causing her to cough repeatedly. When she inhaled, she felt as if a cold wind had been poured into her lungs. It was so cold that she felt very uncomfortable. "Princess, it will get colder if we go further in." "I'm fine." The woman gritted her teeth and urged her horse to gallop forward to catch up with the group in front. However, her physical strength was not as good as those men, so she slowly fell to the back. Arbor floated beside her, looking at her little face that was red from the cold. He lowered his head to look at his own transparent little hand. This place was too cold, and they had been traveling for a long time. It was impossible to constantly mobilize spirit energy to protect one's body. Over time, the cold air would enter one's body. If one didn't have good protective measures, even the strongest person would easily fall sick. The closer they got to the heavenly ice and snow region, the colder the aura became, causing them to shiver from their bones. Akira's lips were completely purple from the cold. She took a large cloak from her inner world and draped it over herself. She was now wearing 2 cloaks and a large cloak, but the cold air penetrated through the layers of clothing and went straight to the depths of her heart. Chapter 23:48. Her cultivation level wasn't high, and she had insisted on following them on this trip. She had long expected to suffer hardships, but she didn't expect it to be so bitter. The group of men in front of him also used their spiritual power to warm their bodies. However, in such a world of ice and snow, the occasional warmth didn't have much effect. Instead, after warming up, they would feel even colder. That bone-piercing coldness penetrated their clothes and entered the deepest part of their hearts. After a wild gallop, the group finally arrived at the entrance of the heaven of ice and snow region under the lead of the polar ice wolf. They had madly galloped for nearly 4 hours on this stretch of road. It was really a case of a horse running to death by looking at a mountain. The glacier was clearly right in front of them, but who knew that it would take so long to run? At noon, they gathered at the entrance of the heaven of ice and snow region. Ming Yas tried his best to suppress the restless roar of the polar ice wolf beneath him. He raised his eyes and coldly gazed at the beautiful scenery of the glacier towering into the clouds. The scenery in front of him was truly spectacular. At a glance, countless large and small glaciers appeared in front of them. The entrance to this place was a glacial canyon. On one side of the ice wall were carved with uncanny craftsmanship, Heaven of Ice and Snow Region, Land of Extreme Cold. On the other side were carved, 10,000 people enter, 10,000 people die. Only an extremely thin crack was left in the middle for people to enter. These 2 lines of words were carved crookedly. Clearly, they weren't carved by the same person. Who knew which almighty cultivator was so sick as to leave these words on the ice wall of the heaven of ice and snow region? "Leave the spirit stallions here." Ming Yas made a decision and jumped down from the polar ice wolf. "We must enter on foot." The ice layer inside was too thin. Once it broke, what they would face would be an extremely terrifying glacier attack. Akira was wrapped in 2 cloaks and a large cloak. The corners of the large cloak were dragging on the ground. She walked forward while panting. "Brother Yas, should we walk in?" Ming Yas glanced at her indifferently. His gaze was still fixed on the 2 smooth ice walls. At this moment, Akira also saw the crack between the 2 ice walls in front of her. The uneven ice surface was very eye-catching under the sunlight. There were also many sharp icicles left on the 2 ice walls, which looked very aggressive. "Let's go. We must find a place to set up camp before it gets dark." The little girl floated over and hovered beside Maya's. At this moment, she saw clearly and recognized Yasi. After all, he had clashed with this fellow several times, so it was impossible for him to not remember him. However, he didn't have a deep impression of it. Of course, she wasn't familiar with Akira. As for his brother Yas, Arbor didn't recognize him at all. What was this guy full of violence doing in this world of ice and snow? Your Highness. Yas raised his hand to stop a guard general from speaking. He suddenly turned his head and shot his gaze in the direction of the young lady. There was nothing there. How could it be? Tai frowned, then turned around and said, "Let's go." The group followed his footsteps and quickly walked toward the crack in the ice wall. The little girl floated along, occasionally looking up at the ice wall that reached into the blue sky. What a tall ice wall! What was waiting for her in this world of ice and snow? Chapter 23:49. There were still a few rays of sunlight, but when they landed on the ice wall, they were so faint that they were almost negligible. They couldn't melt the thick glacier in the slightest. The group didn't speak. Instead, they looked focused and even a bit nervous as they quickened their pace and passed through the steep crevice. A soldier who was just about to lift his leg turned green, and he slowly put down his left leg. When his gaze shifted to the side and a ball of snow-white mink fur suddenly jumped out, he heaved a long sigh of relief. Just now, his heart had almost jumped out of his chest. That damn creak made him think that the glacier under his feet had cracked. Ah, what a cute little thing. Akir's pale face suddenly showed some joy. Ali took a few steps forward, picked up the little thing, and handed it to Akir. Keep it for now. When it's fat, it can go with wine. Arbor! Exclamation point. You bunch of cold-blooded people actually want to drink with a mink that doesn't even have a bit of meat. That snow-white little mink's hind leg was still bleeding. It looked like it had been pierced by an icicle. At this moment, it was lying listlessly in Akir's arms. Akir pursed her lips and smiled. She raised her hand to comb the little white mink's fur. The palm-sized ball was white and tender, and the mink fur on its body was very soft and slippery to the touch. Arbor pursed his lips, somewhat disdainful of Akir's smug look. Wasn't it just carrying a little mouse? Was there a need to be so happy? It was as if she had never seen the world. Strange, why wasn't she floating anymore? A trace of confusion flitted across the little fellow's eyes, and she waved her little arms and legs. Keep floating. Why did you stop here? Hurry into the ice heaven snow region. Since the golden talisman jade tome sucked her soul out and let her float here, it couldn't be aimless, right? If she wanted to float back to Emolyen's side, she had to think of a specific way. The little fellow floated in the air and shook her little arms and legs. Something's wrong? Her soul body was uncontrollably rushing forward. Wait? Wait! What are you doing? Golden talisman jade tome, I'm breaking off relations with you. Damned soul-leaving charm. Don't cause trouble, don't cause trouble. Fuck that her spiritual body was actually pulled over by an irresistible force, directly crashing into the little white sable's body. I'll destroy your grandpa. The little fellow moved its little paws in confusion. It had a physical body now, but the physical body was a mink's claw. Ow, ow, ow. Especially that hairy face, which was still fused into a certain someone's proud chest, and that claw covered in danku was still rubbing her head with all its might. When the little girl completely woke up, she felt as if she had been struck by a bolt from the blue. She was so angry that she felt dizzy and had nowhere to vent her anger. She stretched out her little chubby claws and tore the woman in front of her. Akir shrieked and subconsciously withdrew her hand. The small marten nimbly kicked its legs and landed on the ground, limping towards the depths of the glacier. Damned little bastard, how dare you scratch my hand? Akir screamed angrily. Bring it back for me. I'm going to skin this damned mink alive and use its fur to make a cloak. Inhumane fellow. You actually want to capture me to make clothes? The little girl angrily ran away. Chapter 23:50. She's so small that she can't even be made into a mink fur collar, yet you want to make a cloak out of her. Why don't you go and die? Thump, thump, thump. The little girl ran with all her might, already using all her strength to drink milk. Then that she discovered that the back of her neck was lifted up by someone. She turned her head and met a pair of cold eyes. This damned violent man, it's him again. The little girl kicked her two calves with all her might, looking like she was punching and kicking. The corner of Ming Yas's mouth twitched inexplicably as he met her pair of black, beady eyes. He saw that those beady eyes were filled with anger. Yes, it was anger. Why did he feel that this low-level little mystic beast was so human-like? This was really demonic. A little low-level mystic beast that had yet to develop intelligence actually felt anger? Brother Yas, I'm going to kill her. Miss Chiao's angry curses turned into a squeak, and her little furry face immediately flushed red. Fuck, this little beast couldn't speak human language. This was a low-level little beast. Was there anything more tragic than this? Her soul was embodied in this little beast. If she was killed by that woman, would she be in danger? Would her soul be imprisoned in this dead little beast's body forever and not be able to come out? What's the point of bickering with a little beast that has yet to develop intelligence? Ming Yas glanced indifferently at Akir and flicked her dagger away with his fingertip. Akir angrily stroked the back of her hand, which had 3 bright bloody scratches, and stomped her feet in anger. Brother Yas, you'd actually rather protect that little beast than ignore the injuries on my hand? You're really getting worse as you live. How can you be angry with a little animal? Yas directly put the little white mink into his arms. All right, let's continue on our way. Akir gnashed her teeth in hatred. Seeing this, she had no choice but to take the medicine bottle Alex handed over and smear it on the back of her hand. The little girl lay in Yas's arms with a look of despair. Who asked her to discriminate against weak little animals? Now she had turned into a little animal. Her current appearance was so small, not even 1/5 the size of that white squirrel on Paradise Planet. Oh my god! It was the smallest mink she had ever seen. He did not even look as strong as newbie back then. Sob, 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 of all people, why did you choose to possess such a weak mink? Xiao Mu lay there in despair for a while longer until Ming Yas stopped walking. The group found a relatively flat area to set up camp. They cut off all the icicles that could injure or trip people and threw them to the side. An hour later, the camp was basically built. Dozens of barracks, big and small, were erected one after another on the glittering glacier. One of the soldiers took out a match from his pocket, but before he could light it, it was slapped away. What do you want? We're stepping on a glacier right now. Do you want the glacier to melt and collapse? Are they going to bury us all? How can an ordinary fire extinguisher melt a glacier in such an extremely cold place? The soldier shouted, unconvinced. Can't you see that the sunlight can't reach here? When Ali heard the commotion in the tent area, he hurried over and scolded the soldier who took out the torch. Rest early after eating your rations. We have to continue on our way early tomorrow morning. Everyone listen up. Don't cause any trouble. Chapter 2351. After Ali finished exerting pressure, he brought the guards back to Ming Yas's side and gave him a simple recount of what had just happened in the barracks. Ming Yas didn't pay much attention to it. He nodded and had Ali withdraw. After ordering someone to bring in a bathtub, Ming Yas called for a water spirit master to fill the bathtub with water. Only then did he have the person leave and take off his coat. His fingers touched the little mink in his embrace and he pulled her out. Seeing that the little fellow was curled up into a ball and sleeping soundly, he poked her head with his finger and placed her on the carpet at the side. Splash! Splash! The sound of water made the tired Miss Chiao lift her eyelids and slightly open her small bean-like eyes. Barracks? Why did she vaguely see the back of a person bathing? Miss Chiao's small black eyes suddenly widened, and her little furry face was filled with disbelief. This perverted Ming Yas actually took off his clothes and took a bath in front of her? Did he still have any sense of shame? Sure enough, he was a pervert. A moment of carelessness and she almost grew a needle's eye. Miss Chiao angrily stomped her leg and felt the pain in her small foot unbearable. She didn't manage to pounce out of the barracks. Instead, she rolled on the ground and made a little noise. Ming Yas turned his head and saw that the little white mink was currently limping towards the barracks entrance. He didn't seem to make any movements, only lightly waving his hand. A strong suction force pulled Miss Chiao's body over, and she fell into the water. Pa 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 pa. This repulsive, damned stinky man actually made this crown princess drink your bathwater? I'll whip you to death, you bastard. The little paw exerted all its strength and swung towards that handsome face with a smack. When Guing came in with her master's clothes, she only saw that little animal brandishing its claws and brandishing its fangs and claws as it slapped her master twice. She cried out in alarm and rushed forward. She quickly put down the clean clothes in her arms and reached out to grab Miss Qiao's limbs. Ming Ya stared blankly and raised his hand to stop Gu Ying's actions. Pulling Miss Qiao in front of him, he stared at her small eyes that were filled with anger and coldness. After looking carefully, he could not help but laugh. Guing, don't you think that this little fellow is a little too quick-witted? I've never seen a low-level little mystical beast with such lively eyes. Your Highness, let this servant bring it down first. Yas waved his hand non-committally. Such a small thing can't hurt me. Gu Ying frowned and looked at the little white mink that was still in His Highness's hand and was still using its little claws to slap His Highness's arm. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but when the little white mink looked at him just now, it did seem somewhat human-like. Your Highness, this servant will help you get dressed. Nodding his head, Yas suddenly stood up from the bathtub. Arbor stared at his bare chest with a dumbfounded expression. His gaze moved down 2 inches, and then he hurriedly moved up again. A pair of small meaty claws slapped at his head with all his might. Smack! The little guy exerted all his strength and leaped. He landed on the ground with a plop and rolled out of the tent with water stains all over his body. Perverted fellow! Who wants to see your moldy and stinky body? Her Lotus up. She wanted to go back and see Lotus. She wanted to go back and see Lotus wash her eyes. Ming Yas had a baffled expression. What was going on? Why did he see grief and anger in the little fellow's eyes just now? Isn't this mink a little too emotional? Chapter 2352. Guing was also dumbfounded as she stared at her mistress for a long while before she hurriedly helped her mistress put on her clothes. Your Highness, did you notice that the way that little white mink looked at you just now was a bit strange? You think so too? Guing nodded solemnly. This servant feels like it was looking at a lecher. Ming Yasi, thank you. This prince's taste isn't that heavy. After the grief-stricken Miss Qiao rolled out of Ming Yasi's tent, she dug a hole in the glacier with all her might. No, she was shaving the ice with grief and indignation to calm her emotions. Calm down, don't panic now, don't panic. You must calm down. Talisman, talisman, talisman. There must be a way to dispel this soul-leaving talisman. After it was dispelled, the soul would definitely float back on its own. But the little fellow's claws dug into the ice with all her might, and her originally injured claws started bleeding again. When Ming Yasi walked out wearing an open-collared white robe, he saw the little animal crazily digging at something in front of his house. What are you doing? Ming Yasi picked her up and frowned at the bloodstains on her claws. Guing, bring the medicine. Yes. Ming Yasi carried the little animal back to the tent, threw her on the carpet, and held down her struggling claws. Don't move. This little fellow was quite troublesome. From time to time, she would spasmodically use her claws to scratch people's faces and arms. She really didn't know where he got the kindness to keep her by his side. Akir is waiting outside to catch you and make you into a mink cloak. Ming Yasi's words caused the little fellow's body to stiffen slightly. The latter's hand paused. When the cloak was mentioned, the little fellow actually stopped struggling. As expected, she could understand human language. Ming Yasi glanced at her with slight astonishment in his heart, and then his mouth twitched rather speechlessly. What was going on? At this moment he actually saw the meaning of there was nothing left to live for on this little fellow's furry face. As an ordinary mink, could this fellow's expressions be so rich that it bordered on the freaks? Guing immediately turned to look at His Highness with a look of astonishment. Master was actually amused by a mink? Don't worry. As long as you're obedient, I definitely won't let Akir make you into a mink cloak. Your Highness, Lord Dongshan and Prince Chen of Cangzhou want to see you. Although Ming Yasi had not returned to the underworld state for long, he had already grasped the situation in the Tsang state and the divine prefecture. He also knew who King Dongshan and Prince Chen were. He had also thoroughly investigated Prince Chen's background. As for the Eastern Mountain King, he was just a king with a different surname. Now, the Eastern Mountain King's mansion had few talents and was going downhill. However, it was better to meet the fourth son of the Duan family, who was now Prince Chen. Rumor had it that he was favored by the first emperor in the Tsang prefecture and was doing quite well. After bandaging the little fellow's injured leg, Yas, who had switched from carrying the little fellow to carrying him, had a mysterious smile on his face. Gu Ying stepped forward and drew the curtain for him. Carrying the little white mink, Yas exited the tent and slowly walked forward. From afar, he saw the face of a middle-aged man with a full beard laughing at him. "Greetings, Your Highness." The middle-aged man cupped his hands and smiled. "Greetings, King Dongshan." Ming Yasi glanced at the middle-aged man indifferently and sneered. "I heard that the winter hunt chosen by the great emperor of Zhangzhou is here." Chapter 2353. "Ah yes. Wu Heng, the king of East Mountain, said with a smile, I came to the winter hunt with His Majesty, but I didn't expect to see the crown prince of Mingzhou here. His Highness was quite a ruthless person. It was said that he had only returned to Mingzhou for a few days, but he had driven the dethroned crown prince, Ming Lang, off the stage and taken the supreme position himself. The king of East Mountain carefully sized up the expressionless crown prince of Mingzhou in front of him. Ming Yasi was not very interested in him. Instead, he looked around and asked, "Why don't I see Prince Chen?" Hearing this, the king of East Mountain looked a little embarrassed. Prince Chen had always been willful and reckless. He had walked to the entrance of the tent and said that he wanted to look around, but he had disappeared. At seeing his strange expression, Ming Yasi couldn't help but frown. King of East Mountain, although the heavenly ice and snow region is in your Zhangzhou, it has always been open to the three provinces. Does the Emperor of Zhangzhou not welcome my arrival? Ah, Your Highness, you misunderstood. The King of East Mountain hurriedly smiled apologetically and said, "The Emperor doesn't dislike Your Highness. He even wants to invite Your Highness to our camp to participate in this winter hunt." Ming Yasi frowned slightly and said with a faint smile, "There's no need to invite me. We have other important things to do on this trip, so it's better to do it separately." If he found the divine flower of the snow region, he would not give it to the old man of Zhangzhou. Would he rob him or not? Seeing Ming Yasi's cold expression, the king of East Mountain did not persuade him anymore. Instead, he nodded with a smile and said, "Since Your Highness has other important things to do, I won't delay Your Highness any longer. I'll go first." Before he could say the word, he was surprised to find that the crown prince, who had a calm expression in front of him, suddenly reached out and pressed down the restless little white mink in his arms. The furry little thing was twisting its small body hard, trying to break free from the crown prince's arms. Ming Yasi pursed his lips and held it down with a displeased expression. "Hiss." Ming Yasi subconsciously withdrew his hand and looked coldly at the two small teeth marks on his palm. "Ah, Your Highness, your hand," King Dongshan exclaimed. When he looked up again, he saw that the little white mink had actually landed on the ground and pounced forward like a whirlwind. Ming Yasi, the East Mountain King, Gu Ying, and the others all looked in the direction she was heading. They saw a young man in a light white robe, with his ink-black hair fluttering in the wind, slowly walking past them calmly. From where they were, they could only see the man's picturesque profile. The wind brushed past his clothes, accentuating his glass-like skin. His eyes seemed to flash with a myriad of luster. The little white marten's expression was as if it had seen a brother it hadn't seen for 800 years, causing the corners of everyone's mouths to twitch. Looking at her small body running like a thief, she raised her pair of small claws even more forcefully. The scene in front of him was quite comical. He felt that little marten was simply extending its claws at the man who was passing by, showing an expression of asking for a hug. Tears were almost squeezing out of Miss Chiao's beady eyes. She looked on helplessly as that guy nonchalantly walked past her without even looking at her out of the corner of his eye. Miss Chiao felt unwell all over. Why the heck didn't he turn to look at her? Chapter 2354. Ming Yasi expressionlessly raised his palm, and a surge of energy flowed through his arm. A strong suction force pulled the little fellow into his arms again. He patted her head with a moderate force. "What are you doing?" This fellow actually dared to despise his embrace and wanted to defect to the enemy in public? Where would he put his face as the crown prince of Ming province? Even a small ferret dared to despise him. She simply didn't care about her fur anymore. Miss Chiao indignantly struggled with her 4 small claws and turned her grief into strength as she howled. "Ming Yasi, that you're just a small ferret, but you've evolved. You can even howl like a wolf." Arbor hopelessly closed her eyes and collapsed in his arms. How miserable. Duan Yu, that idiot, actually ignored her. Rather than staying here with this pervert, she dearly wanted to defect to Duan Yu's side. Duan Yu, Duan Yu, Duan Yu. Miss Chiao was filled with resentment, and her 4 small claws restlessly wriggled. The veins on Ming Yasi's forehead throbbed, and he pressed down the little girl's head with a finger. He turned to glare at the Duke of East Mountain and said, "If the Duke of East Mountain doesn't have anything else to say, then see the guest out." His cold gaze swept over Duan Yu, who was walking away. As expected, the rumors were true. This Prince Chen was truly a willful person. He said he was here to pay a visit, but he left without even a greeting. The people of Tsang province were as abominable as the people of the Divine province. They were all ridiculous things. Seeing his displeased expression, the Duke of East Mountain could only bid farewell with a wry smile and leave with his hands cupped. With his tail between his legs, he dejectedly walked out of the camp. Prince Chin, the Duke of East Mountain, Wu Heng, looked exasperatedly at the young man waiting for him outside the camp. "Why didn't you meet with His Highness the Crown Prince of Ming Province?" Duan Yu nonchalantly swept him a glance. "Not interested. If it weren't for the sake of the Emperor, the Duke of East Mountain really wanted to jump out at this moment and beat this willful fellow to a pulp. Since you're not interested, then why did you follow? Why didn't you tell the Emperor that you weren't interested back then? As long as Ming Yasi isn't an idiot, he won't walk into our Tsang province camp." Duan Yu said dryly, "So this trip is futile?" Since it was futile, it didn't matter whether he met her or not. Besides, he had no interest in meeting that domineering fellow. East Mountain King rolled his eyes speechlessly. "In that case, let's go back to the camps." What happened just now? He seemed to have heard a nondescript wolf howl, whimpering like a kitten. The East Mountain King's lips twitched. "It's nothing. It's just a small pet beast of the underworld crown prince." It suddenly opened its mouth and bit the crown prince. Duan Yu remarked dryly, "Even small animals don't like him." The Eastern Mountain King was speechless. Fortunately, the 2 of them did not meet. Given Prince Chen's irreverent attitude, it was hard to imagine what would happen if they met. The next day, Duan Yu put on his clothes dispiritedly, lifted the curtain, and walked out. He said to Xiao Kezi, who was accompanying him, "You stay in the camp. I'm going out for a walk today." "Your Highness, you're going out alone?" Xiao Kezi immediately tensed up. Duan Yu flicked his head. "With your Highness's cultivation, what's there to be afraid of in a mere heaven of ice and snow? You don't need to follow me." Your Highness, Your Highness." Xiao Kezi anxiously stomped his feet when he saw him riding a polar ice wolf into the distance. "Hurry, hurry and follow His Highness." Chapter 23:55. Hearing the slight vibrations, the 3rd prince forcefully lifted the curtain and came out. He said with a dark face, "What is he trying to do now? Was it not enough for him to cause trouble every day? He actually rode a newly hunted polar ice wolf as a mount in this kind of place? Wasn't he worried that this vibration would cause the glacier to explode? This damned show-off maniac, he just wanted to let everyone know that he was the winner of this winter's hunt." Little Kezi hurriedly ordered a group of about 50 personal guards to follow. At the same time, the lifeless Miss Chiao was tucked into Ming Yasi's arms early in the morning and followed the group to the depths of the Ice Heaven Snow region. Along the way, there were all kinds of strange ice stones and ice walls in all kinds of shapes and forms. The ice layer in this Ice Heaven Snow region had been accumulating for many years. Occasionally, a small earthquake would only cause some of the glaciers in the periphery to collapse a little. It wouldn't affect the large stretch of ice walls inside. Akir put on 2 cloaks and a large cloak, but she was still shivering from the cold. Although she was exhausted, she didn't forget to cut her flesh with her eyes. Miss Chiao was currently helplessly hiding in Ming Yassi's arms. There was nothing she could do. With a ready-made human shield to block the wind and snow for her, she was naturally happy to relax. Brother Yassi, where do you think this ice heaven snow region divine flower will bloom? Akir asked against the wind, but she felt the cold wind pour into her heart and lungs, causing her to shiver even more. Ming Yassi coldly looked up at the sharp ice walls in the distance and shook his head. The ice heaven snow region divine flower will belong to the fated one. Miss Chiao, who was hiding in Ming Yassi's arms, was originally curled up listlessly. When she suddenly heard Ming Yassi and Akir's words, she couldn't help but perk up her ears, and her spirits were slightly lifted. Wait, what did she just hear? So these people came all the way to this ice heaven snow region to search for the ice heaven snow region divine flower? Could it be that the ice heaven snow region divine flower recorded in the medicine scripture really existed? Her little head moved, and Miss Chiao popped out of his chest, revealing her furry little head. Seeing her head, Akir's expression carried traces of disgust. She pulled out the dagger in her boot and said to Ming Yassi, "Brother Yassi, let me kill this little beast. I heard that it even bit you yesterday." "You're the little beast, your whole family are little beasts." Miss Chiao glared angrily at Akir with her small black eyes. When the latter saw the look in her eyes, she was taken aback. She pointed at Arbor and screamed, "This little beast can stare?" Ming Yassi, who had already observed the little fellow's various expressions, felt that this action of staring was nothing at all. The little fellow could even make an expression of spitting on someone's face with ease. What did the rest count for? This little beast was definitely out of the ordinary. Perhaps when it grew up, it could evolve into a spirit beast or even a divine beast. If Arbor could hear his thoughts, he would definitely spit at him and ask him where he got his confidence from. "Akir, why are you always angry with an uncivilized little beast?" Yas said impatiently. "Isn't little Gun Gun quite cute? Little Gun Gun?" Arbor stared blankly at Nayas, who had casually given him a name. A mouthful of spittle almost landed on his face. "Who are you calling Gun Gun? Your whole family is round Gun Gun. Little Gun Gun stare." Chapter 2356. "Cough, master, little Gun Gun doesn't seem to like the name you gave it." Gu Ying followed behind her master and could clearly see the grief and indignation that flashed through little Gun Gun's eyes. Here it comes again. This little beast with an extremely rich expression was silently grieving and indignant in the crowd all day long. However, was the protest effective? Yas smirked and reached out to poke her round body. He said with a smile, "Little Gun Gun, do you like the name Master gave you?" "I like your ancestor." Miss Chiao knew that her resistance was futile, so she simply turned her little neck and pointed the back of her head at him. She also spat at him to express her dissatisfaction. He chuckled and raised his hand to rub her little head. He didn't know why, but the more time he spent with this little mink, the more he liked it. This little fellow was too nimble. Her eyes were full of hidden drama. She was definitely the smartest mink in the world. "Big brother." Ali suddenly pointed at a slippery glacier in surprise. "Look, what's that?" Yas raised his eyes and looked in the direction he was pointing. He saw an extremely transparent flower that had shrunk into a ball standing at the edge of a precipitous glacier cliff. It was like a poisonous flower with a fatal attraction that was waving at everyone, emitting an extremely deadly charm. Miss Chiao's little beady eyes were about to burn. It was the Snow Domain Divine Flower. It was the Snow Domain Divine Flower recorded in the book. Looking at its small appearance of having shrunk into a ball and facing the wind and snow on the precipitous ice cliff, it looked very spirited. Jojo inexplicably liked this flower. If this Snow Domain Divine Flower could be planted in her paradise planet, it might even make her paradise planet's spiritual power rise to another level. Although it liked extremely cold places, Jojo's paradise planet ignored elemental power. For example, Some of the plants that like to grow in hot places were growing very well on Paradise Planet. However, Jojo's Paradise Planet couldn't be opened and Little Ball couldn't be contacted. Miss Chiao frowned. Her beady eyes stared at the Snow Domain Divine Flower and were about to burst into flames. None of these problems could stop Jojo's desire to rob the Snow Domain Divine Flower. The little girl looked at her little paws and decided to make a move after making a plan. This was definitely not a sign of being afraid of death. This was IQ. Brother, this must be the Snow Domain Divine Flower, Ali exclaimed in surprise. He promptly kicked his personal guard. You, quickly go and pluck that flower. Be careful, don't damage it. Sit. The personal guard hurriedly raised his head to take a look. Raising his chi, he shot towards the top of the ice wall with a whoosh. The little fellow looked at her small claws wrapped in thick gauze again. She secretly gritted her teeth and watched the guard who jumped onto the ice wall and leaped onto the cliff. The guard carefully walked to the edge of the cliff and picked up a small shovel. He seemed to be very cautious as he dug for the Snow Domain Divine Flower. Arbor couldn't help but laugh when he saw his unfamiliar movements. With just this kind of herb-picking technique, she would probably laugh her head off. Using a shovel to put on an act, it was simply hilarious. What did these people think the Snow Domain Divine Flower was? That they could use a small shovel to dig it out like digging grass? They were simply idiots. Arbor was still laughing at that person's IQ when a long black tail covered with barbs suddenly flew up from the depths of the cliff. Chapter 2357. With a swoosh, it swept the unlucky guy holding the shovel down. Everyone! Exclamation point. This unforeseen event happened too quickly, and no one could react in time. Even Dark Yas didn't see clearly what the tail that swept up from the bottom of the cliff was. The air was filled with a deathly stillness. Everyone looked at each other with a dumbfounded expression. Coward! Miss Chiao struggled to climb onto Dark Yas's lapel. Dark Yas looked down at her speechlessly and then said to the two personal guards standing at the side, "You two go." The two didn't refute and flew up the ice wall after receiving the order. One of the two pulled out the sword at his waist and looked at the cliff with vigilant eyes. But when he looked down, all he could see was a vast miasma. How could he see clearly? The other person squatted down cautiously and touched the Snowfield Divine Flower with trembling hands. Miss Chiao sneered in her heart. This guy is courting death. One person stood at the edge of the cliff with a sword and made a defensive action, using his eyes to signal the other person to hurry up. The personal guard squatting beside the Snowfield Divine Flower took a deep breath and raised the small shovel in his hand to dig at the root of the flower. Clang! A crisp sound rang out. He felt as if the shovel had hit a piece of metal, and the recoil made his entire arm feel numb. This layer of ice is too sturdy, right? He thought to himself, but his arm inadvertently touched the Snowfield Divine Flower's petal again. Miss Chiao rolled her beady eyes. Careful! Ali suddenly cried out in alarm. Everyone saw that at the edge of the cliff, a black tail covered with barbs quickly swung up again. Without any explanation, it dragged the guard who was standing on the side down. The other guard was even more miserable. After he touched the Snowfield Divine Flower 3 times in a row, it suddenly threw a tantrum. The originally spherical petals suddenly opened up and rose several meters into the air. Baring its fangs and brandishing its claws, it swallowed the dumbfounded personal guard in one gulp. Akir stared blankly and subconsciously swallowed her saliva, clutching the cloak on her shoulders tightly. This Snow Domain Divine Flower could attack on its own? This thing was too terrifying. How did it suddenly rise so high? The blooming flower was actually able to swallow the bodyguard's sturdy body in one gulp. Akir gasped. Subconsciously, she didn't want to have any contact with this flower. Why, Big Brother Yas! Akir cried out in alarm but couldn't stop him in time. She could only watch helplessly as Dark Yas flew up and landed on the edge of the frozen cliff. At this time, the group of people under the ice wall had already seen clearly what was crawling out from the bottom of the cliff. The 2 huge antennae on its head swayed back and forth, and its black body was more than 10 meters long. Insect! Akir exclaimed and rubbed the skin on her hands. So disgusting. It was indeed very disgusting. Miss Chiao looked at the huge worm up close and felt so nauseous that she almost vomited. Especially when Dark Yas was fighting with the big worm. Every time he slashed the worm's body, some green mucus would spurt out. Not only was it extremely fishy, but it was also extremely disgusting. In order to prevent her white fur from being stained by the mucus, Miss Chiao curled up her entire body in Ming Yassi's embrace and used his clothes to cover her small body as she angrily shouted with a look of disgust. Chapter 2358. Didn't this guy know to put her down in a safe place and come up here to fight by himself? Smelling such smelly blood made her feel a bit dizzy. She had to admit that her current mink body was really weak. Rip. The earth spirit in Yas's hand transformed into thousands of earth blades that swept toward the big black worm at the edge of the cliff. That big worm had been guarding this snow domain divine flower all year round and had already reached the peak of the 15th level of the spirit realm. Even so, it was still nothing in front of Yas. Akir wiped away cold sweat and held her head high as she observed Yas, who was fighting above the ice wall. Seeing his thousands of earth blades fly over and surround the big black worm, cutting it into pieces without a word, she finally heaved a long sigh of relief. Then, she couldn't help but tense up as she turned to look at the snow domain divine flower that was silently standing to the side. Everyone had clearly seen the changes in the snow domain divine flower just now. This flower wasn't to be trifled with. If you wanted to pick it, you'd have to be prepared for the fate of being swallowed. The little white mink dug out from Yas's jacket and raised its paw to sniff the air with a look of disgust. Yas's expression was focused as a faint golden luster emanated from his palm and encircled the snow domain divine flower. Arbor watched coldly from the sidelines, but he was a bit surprised. He had long known that this guy was no longer the same as before, but he hadn't expected that he had already broken through to the divine realm. He must have used some secret divine realm technique to advance. Arbor snorted and disdainfully ridiculed in his heart. Then he focused on Yas and used divine power to break the snow domain divine flower from the ice wall. This time, Ming Yassi had learned his lesson. He didn't touch the petals of the snow domain divine flower when he took them. Thus, the snow domain divine flower didn't react at all and showed no signs of going berserk. Akir and the others, who were looking up at Her Highness, all heaved sighs of relief when they saw this scene. Ali smiled excitedly. We still have to rely on Big Brother. Sure enough, Big Brother is the smartest. Ali laughed heartily. With Big Brother's help, wouldn't the snow domain divine flower be a piece of cake? Akir pursed her lips and smiled. She glanced bashfully at Ali and then raised her head to look at Ming Yas, unable to conceal the adoration in her eyes. When Ming Yassi completely removed the snowfield divine flower from the ice wall, a faint luster lingered around it. Miss Chiao looked at the flower right in front of her, and a brilliant yearning immediately appeared in her eyes. Although Yas wasn't a very reliable person, he had dug out the entire snowfield divine flower. Every leaf and stem had been dug out perfectly. This was an extremely alluring snow domain divine flower. After being plucked, the snow domain divine flower lost its attacking power, leaving only a faint fragrance. The entire flower was emitting a faint glazed luster, which was very eye-catching. Roar! At this moment, an earth-shattering roar suddenly came from the bottom of the cliff. The personal guards below the ice wall all felt their chi and blood churn in their chests, and they couldn't help but take a few steps back. Those with weaker cultivation even spat out a mouthful of blood. Akir's and Ali's expressions changed. A mere roar could force back more than 1,000 people. This person definitely didn't come with good intentions. Chapter 2359. The two of them looked up. Above the cliff, a towering, enormous head suddenly appeared. It climbed out of the boundless fog and leaped onto the ice wall with a whoosh. Its enormous figure appeared before everyone's eyes. Akir's expression tensed, and she subconsciously clenched her fists. The enormous creature in front of them looked almost as tall as a small building. Its two bell-sized eyes were emitting a faint red light as they stared at Ming Yas mercilessly. In front of this enormous creature, Her Highness simply appeared pitifully small. What kind of monster is this? Ali shrieked. Akir's train of thought was interrupted by this shriek. She abruptly reacted, and her expression changed dramatically as she said, "What are you all standing there for? Everyone heed my command. Go up and help Her Highness fight." Yes. Although the personal guards were terrified, they also clearly understood that if Her Highness suffered any losses here, their entire family's lives would also be finished. Thus, although they were terrified, they still had to brace themselves and go up. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Several figures took the lead and leaped onto the ice wall, blocking Ming Yasa's path. Ming Yasa's expression didn't change. Instead, he coldly gazed at the monster that had climbed up from below the cliff. This fellow's head was a bit taller than a mountain, and there were several large black tumors on its head. It looked extremely terrifying. Its body was like a calf, but its tail was like a long scorpion's tail, and it was covered with dark spikes. Ming Yasi glanced at it and understood in his heart. It seemed that it wasn't that black bug that had used its tail to pull people down time and time again, but rather this giant scorpion monster in front of him. He had almost been fooled just now. Under Ming Yasi's meaningful glance, those personal guards rushed up without regard for their own safety and resigned themselves to their fate as the vanguard. Unfortunately, the giant scorpion monster's attack power was too strong. It didn't seem to move at all. With a curl and a pull of its tail, two figures were swept up by its long tail and torn into pieces with a ripping sound. What was even more disgusting was that the monster actually openly tore the person into pieces in front of everyone and stuffed them into its huge mouth to chew on them. Miss Chiao took a look and expressionlessly retracted her head, almost vomiting. Disgusting thing, hurry up and deal with it. He was simply obstructing Jojo's view. Dark Yasa's eyes turned cold as he looked at the huge monster in front of him. More than a dozen personal guards rushed forward and were all killed without any distinction. Ming Yasi's long eyebrows furrowed slightly, and then he furrowed them deeply. This guy looked pretty strong. Dozens of bodyguards jumped onto the platform. This ice wall had a rather narrow space for them to fight. Dark Yas glanced at the personal guards who had jumped up, and with a sudden leap, he jumped down from the ice wall. The dozens of personal guards left by the cliff naturally became sacrifices again in order to ensure His Highness' safety. However, when the scorpion-tailed monster saw Dark Yas fleeing from the cliff, it let out an earth-shaking roar. A black tail pierced through several people's chests and climbed over their corpses. On the high ice wall, a large head covered in warts hung down, coldly looking at the people who were trying their best to calm down. Roar! The monster let out another furious roar, and its huge body suddenly pressed down. He actually jumped down to the bottom of the ice layer at the speed of lightning. Chapter 2360. Careful! Yali's expression changed greatly, and he commanded his personal guards to quickly spread out. Bang! The scorpion-tailed monster shook its large head, its eyes locked onto Ming Yas, who was protected in the middle of the crowd. Brothers, let's go! A leader of the personal guards roared. He led all of his personal guards forward like a tide, pressing in from all directions and surrounding the huge monster. Everyone mustered all of their spiritual energy and smashed it at the monster with all their might. For a moment, the monster was beaten to the point where its body trembled under the attacks of 1,000 people. It could only dodge. However, it was surrounded in the center of the circle. No matter where it hid, it would be beaten. Roar! With a furious roar, the people in the inner circle were all sent flying. Ming Yasa's expression changed slightly, and he warned, "Block your 5 senses." This guy's voice also contains a trace of power. However, his warning came a bit late. Even so, over 100 people had already been sent flying by the huge monster's roar. They rolled back and forth on the ground with pained expressions, their eardrums seeming to have been pierced. The scorpion-tailed monster was very nimble in the center of everyone's attacks. With just a turn of its tail, a row of people were hooked by its barbed tail. Crack, crack, crack! It let out a furious roar and suddenly turned its head, spitting at the row of soldiers on the left. Buzz! Those personal guards didn't expect the monster to have a follow-up move. They were immediately stung by a series of small steel bees, falling to the ground with a thud, their eyes wide open. Even in death, they didn't understand what had happened. Miss Chiao, who was hiding in Ming Yas's embrace, saw everything clearly. This old monster also raised a group of small steel bees. When he opened his mouth, he would spit them out. Those little things were all poisonous. They had the absolute right to insta-kill any great spirit master below rank 10. She couldn't help but rejoice in his misfortune. Ming Yas, this arrogant guy, was in for it this time. Hit with all your might. Miss Chiao didn't mind watching the show. Her pair of black bean eyes were focused on the snowfield divine flower in Ming Yas's hand from beginning to end. Get out of the way! Yas bellowed. If this continued, the thousands of guards he had brought with him would all be killed by this ferocious giant beast. Ming Yasi naturally couldn't sit idly by and do nothing. With a leap, he arrived in front of the scorpion-tailed monster and raised the snow domain divine flower in his hand. Roar roar roar. When the scorpion-tailed beast saw the snowland divine flower, it roared at Ming Yas with its eyes wide open. ACI was already on guard, so this roar had no effect on him. However, at such a close distance, Miss Chiao, who had her ears covered, felt a little uncomfortable from the vibrations. She secretly complained about Yas's unkindness in her heart. I told you to put her down before you go up and hit her. He couldn't understand human language at all. Come on. Ming Yasi sneered and waved the snow domain divine flower up and down in front of the monster. Courting death. Arbor gave a small comment. Then she saw Ming Yas throw the snow domain divine flower to the side of the ice layer without hesitation. Her gaze immediately followed, and her small mouth opened slightly. She looked at the flower that flew out with a pained expression and roared in her heart. What a waste of God's gift. A wasteful person like you isn't worthy of treasures. Leave it to Jojo to take care of. Roar. The little girl pounced out of Ming Yas's arms. Chapter 2361. Taking advantage of the chaos, the little fellow rolled on the ground and nimbly rolled out of the crowd that on the other hand, Nayas, who was completely engrossed in the battle with the scorpion-tailed beast, didn't even notice that something was missing from his chest. Roar! Lord Jojo ran wildly on the ice as if he was in high spirits. As soon as he opened his mouth to make a sound, he immediately realized that something was wrong and wished that he could hit himself on the head. Fuck, why are you so excited? What are you shouting for? The most important thing now was to keep a low profile. Let them fight. Fight. Continue fighting. Jojo grabbed the snow domain divine flower with his mouth and hid in a crack in the ice with a whoosh. Akir turned around and saw this scene. Shocked, she shrieked, "Little bastard! You actually dared to steal the flower." A wave of spiritual energy shot over and exploded at Jojo's feet with a bang. Stinking woman! With a whoosh, Lord Siqiao quickly jumped from one crack in the ice layer to another. Then, with the snow domain divine flower in her mouth, she ran for her life and ran away. That appearance and that figure were absolutely stunning. Ali turned around when he heard the sound and saw the little fellow's figure. The corners of his mouth twitched, and he was so angry that he laughed. It's quite clever. It's a fisherman taking advantage of the situation, right? I'll chase it. That little bastard, don't even think about running away. Akir took out a bow and arrow from her inner world. Glaring angrily, she chased in the direction of Arbor with a whoosh. At the same time, Nayas summoned the sword of Hades from his conscious. With a flash of light, it pierced through the beast's head and stabbed it back and forth a dozen times. The beast roared heavily, its voice reaching the horizon. Then, its entire body went limp and collapsed, smashing into the thick ice with a boom. This layer of ice instantly emitted a DGG sound, one after another, of shattering sounds. Because the commotion was too big, it alarmed the Zhangzhou emperor in the distant camp. The emperor ordered a few subordinates to scout for information. The Nether Yas summoned the sword of Nether deity and chopped the giant beast into pieces. His body swayed along with it. Ali hurriedly reached out to support her. The giant beast smashed through the layer of ice under its feet. Everyone was horrified to find that cracks were spreading out from under their feet like a spider web. Let's go! Mayas roared loudly, leading everyone in a mad dash forward. Let's go, let's go, let's go! Ali yelled. The ice under their feet continued to shatter. Everyone raised their chi and flew forward. Only then did Ming Yas remember that Lil Thing had already disappeared from his bosom. When he looked up again, he saw a snow-white little guy struggling to escape through the cracks in the ice. More importantly, she was holding a snow domain divine flower in her mouth. At this moment, Ming Yas was angered to the point of laughter by this little thing. He's quite greedy. Even at the last moment of his life, this guy still refused to let go of the snow domain divine flower in his mouth, running for his life in a hurry. His lips curled into a sneer. Little guy, you've really pissed me off. Akir took the lead and chased after the little guy, shooting several arrows in succession. The corners of Ali's eyes couldn't help but twitch. It was mainly because he saw that the little beast in front of him was actually moving in a very coquettish manner. The S-shaped path it took was simply breathtaking. Chapter 2362. However, she leaped into a crack in the ice wall and popped out with her head raised. All of Akir's arrows landed on the ice, so how could they hit her? Akir, on the other hand, was infuriated. She followed behind the little critter and cursed incessantly. She angrily roared, "Stop right there, little beast! But you'd be an idiot if you stopped. How many freaking arrows have you shot already?" "A total of 12 arrows. This miss has formed a grudge with you. Just you wait. When Miss recovers her female form, I'll fucking press you to death." Awur! Awur! The little wolf cub's howls kept coming out of the little critter's mouth. The corners of Ali's eyes twitched uncontrollably. He turned to look at his expressionless and uncertain elder brother and coughed lightly. Big brother, I think this little critter is quite nimble. Don't tell me you ordered it to take this snowfield divine flower. Get out of the way first." Styx glanced at him indifferently. The look in his eyes was as if he was looking at an idiot. It couldn't be any more obvious. Ali rubbed his nose with a helpless expression. The remaining 800 personal guards also took out bows and arrows from their inner worlds and aimed in the direction Arbor was fleeing. Wait. For some reason, Styx's heart couldn't help but skip a beat, and he subconsciously reached out to stop his stupid subordinates. The stupid guards all stopped what they were doing and looked at His Highness with a stunned expression. Was His Highness going to let this little critter go? But they had fought so hard for so long and lost 200 to 300 brothers. Were they going to let this trash little critter take advantage of them when they finally plucked the snowfield divine flower? Akir, who was running at the front, was about to go crazy from JoJo's anger. Every time she shot an arrow, it either nailed into the ice or bounced back. After shooting more than 10 arrows in a row to no avail, she was so angry that she snapped the bow in her hand in two and threw it on the ground. The ice beneath her feet rumbled and swayed, and then it suddenly cracked. Akir reflexively flew up. With a furious roar, she pounced toward Arbor, who was in the crevice of the ice. Damn woman! JoJo-sama was furious. She turned her head and glared angrily at Akir with her round black beady eyes. Then, with a leap, she moved from one crack to another. He stared with a slight chill in his heart. Akir had shattered the crack in the ice where he had been crouching. If it wasn't for the fact that I ran away quickly, I would have turned into minced meat by now. You bitch! JoJo-sama will remember you. In the future, I will definitely make you return everything to JoJo. She pounced and dodged another attack. When she landed, her hind legs couldn't help but twitch. Holding the snow domain divine flower in its mouth, it turned its head and looked at its leg claws. He couldn't help but vomit blood from anger. His wound had been wrapped in gauze for less than a day. After being chased all the way here, it had split open again. This weak chicken body, JoJo hated it. Woo-woo. Yas coldly watched for a while before catching up to Akir and saying coldly, "Wait? What are you waiting for, Brother Yas? Are you still going to protect this lowly little dumb beast? It's a thief, a thief!" Akir shrieked. She had chased it all the way, but she couldn't even kill a little dumb beast. This dealt a huge blow to Akir's spirit. She was about to go crazy from anger. In any case, she had successfully broken through to the spiritual realm with the help of spiritual herbs and elixirs. Moreover, she had mastered a kind of earth spiritual power. Chapter 2363. But now, she couldn't even deal with a country bumpkin little critter. She was really going to be angered to death. Yasi knew what she was thinking. Wasn't she just flying into a rage out of humiliation? Useless fellow, getting angry at a little critter that hasn't even gained sentience? Yasi impatiently waved her away and coldly gazed at Arbor, who was hiding in a crack in the ice. Come here. But, do you think I can pounce on you like a puppy just because you call out to me? Miss Chiao coldly gazed at Yasi in front of her, calculating her escape route. She was small, and there were cracks in the ice everywhere. She could just slip in and hide for a while. Let's see how he'll catch her. But with her injured leg, she really couldn't run anymore. Unless she wanted to be legless for the rest of her life. She didn't want to be trapped in this weak little critter's body for the rest of her life. She wanted to return. Unable to understand what was flickering in this little bean's eyes, Yasi impatiently shouted, I advise you to hurry up and come here. I know you can understand human language. Understand your sister. Xiao Mu darted up and nimbly rolled and pressed into a crevice in a flash. Wait. Yasi's pupils contracted slightly. With a crisp crack, the ice layer, which had already stopped moving, began to crack even more violently, as though Jojo had triggered a mechanism. Damn it! Yasi was anxious and angry, but he also felt an inexplicable sense of amusement. This little critter knew quite a lot. It actually chose the weakest part of the ice to stomp on. Under the shaking, everyone had no choice but to rise into the air again. Akir also jumped into the air with everyone and looked down at the little critter, who was scurrying back and forth on the ice layer. She was so angry that her pretty face was flushed red. Little critter, you're doing this on purpose? Yasi coldly gazed at the little critter on the ice layer, and a divine power suddenly circled around his hand. A strong suction force squeezed toward Arbor. Miss Chiao had been sucked by him many times, so she was already on guard. When she saw him raise his hand, she shrank into one of the ice caves and slid over like a mole. From another cave, she popped her head out with a whoosh. Ming Yasi was speechless. He had the urge to choke her to death and stew her soup. What should he do? This little guy is too hateful. It was so hateful that it made him gnash his teeth in anger. Jojo did not care about his expression. Instead, he slid from one cave to the other and soon disappeared from everyone's sight. Chase? Dark Yas gritted his teeth and roared in a low voice. If he were to let this little fellow slip away right under his nose, then he wouldn't be able to survive. Oh! The little guy's little ears twitched as he listened to the sound of galloping hooves from afar. Someone was coming. Although she didn't know if it was a friend or foe, she still inexplicably rolled towards the source of the sound. That's right. Basically, get lost. Fuck, Jojo was about to die from anger. To think that she, the great Jojo, had to roll in order to protect her short legs, which were about to become crippled. She might as well roll fast, but there were many caves in the broken ice here. She zigzagged from cave to cave, and her speed and agility made Alex and the others gasp in amazement. This little mink had become an immortal. Everyone cursed in their hearts. How could there be such a nimble mink? Chapter 2364. How was this still a ferret? This was simply a divine ferret. Sir Jojo rolled about and finally sensed that the sound of hooves was getting closer and closer to her. When she looked up, she was so moved that tears almost streamed down her face. Fuck! It was Duan Yu. Duan Yu came to save her. Duan Yu Wu, Duan Yu. The little fellow rolled all the way over, but she still didn't forget to hold that snow domain divine flower in her mouth. With a leap, she hurriedly pounced at Duan Yu's handsome face, who was dashing over. It was Duan Yu. He was her big brother. Hurry and save me! Sir Jojo's pounce just so happened to land on Duan Yu's nose, causing him to almost suck in a mouthful of fur. Duan Yu hastily pulled that little fellow off his face and looked down in bewilderment. He happened to meet her pair of clever, beady black eyes. This was? A ferret? But wasn't this ferret's gaze a bit too rich? Looking at her wet eyes, he saw a pitiful look. She raised her little head and stared straight at him. That gaze was filled with the expression of, I finally found my biological brother I haven't seen in 800 years. Duan Yu couldn't help but twitch his mouth. He felt that this ferret's gaze was very playful. Moreover, when their gazes met, Duan Yu was inexplicably stunned by her gaze. Seriously, what the hell? Duan Yu didn't have the energy to retort, but his slender fingers picked up the little fellow. Then he saw the transparent, glazed, spherical flower in the little fellow's mouth. Wait a minute. Wasn't this the Snow Domain Divine Flower? He knew that the Snow Domain Divine Flower would lose its attacking power after being plucked. But the problem was, where did this weak beast pluck the Snow Domain Divine Flower? Could it be that she wasn't as weak as she looked? Duan Yu reflexively reached out to take the Snow Domain Divine Flower in her mouth. Our dear Xiao Mu immediately shrunk back defensively and glared indignantly at Duan Yu with a pair of accusatory eyes. Damn Duan Yu, Sir Jojo misjudged you. You actually want to fight tribulation. What? Duan Yu inexplicably sensed a trace of disdain and contempt from the depths of her eyes, and he couldn't help chuckling. He reflexively raised his hand to pat her small head. At the same time, the ice layer finally stopped shaking. It was just that this ice layer had turned from smooth and flat to broken pieces full of scars and cracks. If one was not careful, one could fall through the cracks. Ming Yasi chased over with his men, and he immediately saw the little beast curled up in Duan Yu's hand. After sizing up Duan Yu with his dark eyes, Ming Yasi sneered and said, "So it's Zhangzhou's Prince Qin?" Duan Yu looked up at him with an indifferent expression. "Your Highness the Underworld State's Crown Prince, I've heard a lot about you." The two of them looked cold and distant as if they were meeting for the first time. "Stop pretending. Don't you guys know each other?" Jojo retorted inwardly. She subconsciously pulled at Duan Yu's palm and jumped into his arms with a swish. Still holding the Snow Domain Divine Flower in her mouth, she vigilantly glanced at Akir, who was glaring at her across from her. "Stinking woman! What are you glaring at?" Ming Yasi's eyes flashed with a trace of anger that he himself didn't notice as he watched the little weakling shrink into Duan Yu's arms and abandon him. For some reason, he just didn't feel comfortable in his heart. He was clearly the one who discovered this little weakling first, so why should someone else beat him to it? Chapter 2365. Prince Qin, I'm truly sorry. My family's little beast is rather mischievous. It scampers everywhere and isn't shy with strangers. Please return it to me. Yasi coldly said to Duan Yu while suppressing his anger. Duan Yu looked down at the weak mink holding the flower in his arms before looking up to glance at Yasi. Do you have proof? What? Yasi only felt a surge of anger from the bottom of his heart, and his entire person also turned cold. I said, what proof do you have to prove that she's your little beast? Yasi gritted his teeth. What the hell could this ownerless little beast use as proof? This was merely a low-level Mystic Realm little beast. Who knew if it had surpassed level 3 Mystic Beasts? Proof? He clearly knew that it was impossible to prove, yet he said such things. This Duan Yu was indeed unbelievably cunning. Arbor hid in Duan Yu's arms and repeatedly nodded its little head in support of Duan Yu. That's right, what proof do you have to prove that this Lord Xiao is your beast? If you don't have proof, scram. Akir placed her hands on her hips and shouted angrily, whoever wants this little beast can take it away. But we sacrificed many people's lives to obtain that Snow Domain's divine flower with great difficulty. It must be returned to its rightful owner. It turned out that this little fellow had obtained this Snow Domain's divine flower in passing. Oh no, it was in passing. As a habitual offender, how could Miss Qiao return the flower in her mouth to someone else? That was absolutely impossible. Her beady black eyes stared vigilantly at Akira across from her. That look of his shocked everyone in the room that this truly was an exotic mink. They had never seen such a greedy mink. You're just a low-level little mystic beast. How could you chew this Snow Domain's divine flower? Why don't you try? They could even write their names backwards if they didn't make you explode and die in minutes. Little furball, come here. Duan Yu extended a hand in front of the little ferret. Miss Chiao's eyes instantly brimmed with fury. That gaze was simply ruthless. This damn Duan Yu was itching for a beating. What kind of nickname did he give her? What kind of freaking name was Little Furball? Also, he actually stared at her so directly. He actually extended his hand toward her with the Snow Domain's divine flower in his mouth? Shameless. He wanted to rob Jojo's Snow Domain's divine flower again. Donya, I was wrong about you. You actually dared to rob Lord Jojo. The little ferret's furious gaze made Duan Yu somewhat embarrassed. Inexplicably, he explained to her, look, this Snow Domain divine flower loves the cold. Now that you're holding it in your mouth, its stem and leaves are wilting. It's going to die soon. A pair of black bean eyes glanced at the flower. Sure enough, the flower was wilted and looked like it was about to wither. Weakling. Jojo cursed in his heart. You're so weak. How can you have the face to be a saint medicine? Although he was cursing in his heart, he still couldn't bear it. He could not let such a rare divine flower of the snow region die. Sir Jojo looked up at Duan Yu with the don't lie expression. He glared at Duan Yu with his beady eyes. Duan Yu said in amusement, don't worry, I'll store this Snow Domain's divine flower in a jade box for you. I won't snatch it from you. This is your Snow Domain's divine flower. It was only then that Jojo nodded and spat the flower into his hand. There were even a few drops of suspicious liquid hanging from the flower stem. It was sparkling and translucent. Duan Yu secretly twitched his mouth. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.